welcome one, welcome all to our meeting. And right here, we're going to get going. Mr. Dehaney with the city manager's briefings.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, good afternoon. Before we get started with the briefing, I got a brief update I wanted to provide council. So after nearly 4 months of work, the Virginia Beach Department of Public Health and our partnership together with the City of Virginia Beach, I am pleased to report that we have reached a major milestone. The Commonwealth of Virginia through its...
Yeah, I don't think your mic's on, Patrick.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. All right. I'll start over. After nearly 4 months of work accomplished by the Virginia Department of Public Health in partnership with the City of Virginia Beach, I am pleased to report that we have reached a major milestone. The Commonwealth of Virginia, through its Department of Emergency Management, will be assuming responsibility of the Vaccinate Virginia Beach mass vaccination operations at the Virginia Beach Convention Center starting Monday, April 26, 2021. The last day for the joint city and the public health department's operations will be April 22nd of this week. This means that we will be packing up on Thursday to make sure that the state and its contractor will be ready first thing Monday morning to take off where we took off. The state will have a separate agreement with the convention center to use the exhibit hall and the space. As we understand it, the citizens should see little difference in the overall operations. However, now that we are in phase 2, there is no longer any need for people to pre-register and wait for an invitation to schedule an appointment. People can make their appointments directly in the system now. VDM anticipates running the convention center clinic for at least another 45 days. The program will include a public education component with teams going into neighborhoods with identified social and healthcare vulnerabilities. FEMA is also operating a large regional CVC at Military Circle until May 22nd. The Virginia Beach Department of Public Health will continue to offer community vaccination clinics to ensure that there's opportunity to vaccinate underserved areas, and we will provide some limited city support to these clinics. City staff who has been redeployed to support the mass vaccination efforts will be returning to their normal work assignments. This comes at a good time as more and more city services are reopening. Starting April 26, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management will take over the CVC, and they will provide up to 2,000 shots a day, 6 days a week for another 45 days. The volume, of course, will be dependent on vaccine supply. So, Mr. Mayor and members of council, with your support and policy direction, we've been able to achieve tremendous results. Since we first took over the clinic operations in December 28th, we have given more than 125,000 shots. We've expedited protection for healthcare workers, our seniors, our essential workers, our city workforce, and many others. We've provided a model that's been adopted by the community, the region, the state, but also the country. We've served many vulnerable populations through our mass care and our small vaccination sites. I'm incredibly proud of what we've accomplished, especially since, as you know, we started out, there was tremendous amount of challenges. With the technical hurdles, we were able to adjust staffing and provide up to each day about 100 people have been necessary to run the operations. And every department, from accountants to utility workers to department directors, have played a key role in ensuring that the mass vaccination site has been a success. And there's no way that we could have done this without the support of our Medical Reserve Corps and our CERT team and the many volunteers that have worked with us to put shots in arms. We also received tremendous amount of help from Centera, Hampton University's nursing program, and also the medical students from EVMS. The day-to-day lifting, though, was not done by one group, it was done by an entire operation. And the primary groups that played a key role into this were definitely the Virginia Department of Public Health, the Office of Emergency Management, Emergency Medical Services, the Virginia Beach Fire Department, the Virginia Beach Sheriff's Office, the IT Department, the Communications Office, also the Police Department, and Parks and Rec and Convention Center staff, and the Emergency 911 Center, and also the Special Events Office. While we still have a ways to go to make sure that everyone who wants a vaccine receives it, the good news is that we are seeing more and more providers come to the marketplace, and that should pave the way for lessening restrictions in the weeks to come. So I just wanted to take some time out and really let council know that of the tremendous efforts that we've done as it relates to mass vaccination, but then also to let you know that we're moving away from that, and the state is going to take on that key role for us while we focus on reopening our city.
And thank you, Mr. Dehaney, but once again, I want to compliment you and the entire staff. I know a lot of the city employees were deployed to help, and the feedback that we have been receiving from a number of people about the ease and, just the friendliness of it has been overwhelming, so we do want to thank you. Also want to mention that Mr. Rouse and Ms. Abbott will be running behind, but they will be here later. So at this point, Mr. Dehaney, if we can proceed.
Mr. Mayor, the first briefing will be provided by Letitia Shelton, our finance director. She will give the interim financial update for the city.
Good afternoon, Mayor Dyer, Vice Mayor Woods, and City Council. I'm Letitia Shelton, the Director of Finance, here to present the 9th month of the General Fund update. Next slide. Here's the General Fund status as of March 31st. Year-to-date General Fund revenues are $668.7 million. Up by $10.2 million over last year, and this is due to real estate and general sales taxes doing better than we had anticipated. Year-to-date expenditures, including encumbrances, are $966.7 million, increased 3.7% over last year, and this is due to hazard, emergency responders, and appreciation pay for staff. Next slide. This table provides a breakdown and comparison of the general fund local revenues. Real estate revenues are $307.2 million, an increase of $15.1 million from the prior year, and this is due to 3.4% increase in our assessed values. Personal property taxes are $23.3 million, an increase of approximately $300,000 over last year. Other local taxes year-to-date are $187.8 million, $800,000 less than the prior year. Charges for services are $27.4 million, a decrease of $2.6 million over last year. The use of money and property, which includes interest revenues and rental income from the convention center, are down $3.1 million from last year. Fines, fees, and licenses are approximately $500,000 less than the prior year. Next slide, please. There are 9 types of other local taxes. I will only highlight a few of them. Sales tax year-to-date revenues of $52.3 million are ahead of the FY20 collections by $4.8 million. Business license revenues of $47.8 million are $2.5 million less than the prior year. Hotel taxes of $5.7 million are $500 less than last year's revenues as well. Meal taxes of $28.4 million are $4.3 million less than prior year. Next slide. Again, this is just to remind you that there's a 1 to 2 month lag in the time and collection of our taxes. Next slide, please. Here's a monthly comparison of the major trustee taxes. As you review the monthly data, just remember there's a 1 month lag in the collection of hotel, meals, and administration taxes, and there's a 2 month lag in the collection of sales taxes. Just as a reminder, March data includes $400,000 of hotel taxes and $3.5 million of meal taxes that was received in February but not posted until March. Again, for those who like graphics, this is just a chart of comparison of the hotel tax revenues. Again, the dip is because we received some revenues for $400,000 in February, but it was not posted until March. Next slide. This chart reflects the comparisons of meal tax revenues received by the city. Again, the decline in February revenues compared to last year is due to the $3.5 million of meal tax revenues received in February, but not posted until March. Next slide. Through March 31st, the general fund expenditures, including encumbrances, are $966.7 million, compared to $932.4 million in FY20. The $34.3 million increase in expenditures is due primarily, again, to emergency responders, hazard, and appreciation pay of $6 million. Payments of $16.4 million to United Way, to aid them in reaching individuals affected by COVID-19. And $10.4 million of CARES funds was added to the city's reserve of contingencies. This guide chart tracks year-to-date revenues and expenses comparing budget to actuals. You will notice that the overall expenditures are tracking 5.6% lower than the anticipated budget, as well as the revenues are tracking 1.1% higher than the anticipated budget for revenues. The city received a total of $78.6 million in CARES funding as of March 31st. The $78.6 million does not include other CARES Act grants, such as the Municipal Utility Relief Program, the 2020 Elections Grant, the Emergency Shelter Grant, or the Community Development Block Grant. But as previously noted, the CARES Act funding is not a part of the general fund. However, it is important for council to know how much we received and how much has been spent year to date. Right now, $5.5 million is still unspent. As the March general fund revenues are ahead of the prior year and the general fund expenditures are tracking comparably to the prior years, we are anticipating FY21 actual revenues will exceed budget and FY21 expenditures will be below. The last slide is just some dates for you to keep in your memory, and that concludes my financial update. And are there any questions from council?
Thank you so much, Letitia, for a great report. The CARES Act funding, the $5.5 million, is there a deadline that has to be spent by?
I don't think so. She wants to know do we have a deadline for the spend it?
Yeah.
When? When is the deadline?
When did they move to April or something like that?
April?
Yeah, I don't know.
Councilmember Wilson, so the CARES Act funding that the city received, if you recall, the city council appropriated the entirety of the $39 million, and they cleared that and reimbursed the city for a general fund public safety salary reimbursement. And then that was the local funding that was freed up from that was put into a reserve for city council's use at a future point in time. So there's no spending deadline associated with that.
Okay.
We will be able to meet all grant requirements to be able to report out an allowable use of that. So there's no required timeline for the city council's dedicated reserve that they have in place right now.
So what can that money be used for?
Since it's local funding, city council has the ability to utilize the local funding for the purposes that they deem necessary or fit.
Okay. Thank you so very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, at the time of the adoption of our budget and the budget revenue estimates was before the American Rescue Plan Act and the sending out additional up to family of four, a check of $5,600. I know those checks are coming out in phases, but have you had any discussions with HRPDC and other economists as to, in light of that unprecedented cash infusion, and when you think of how much money that is, I've estimated it could be as much as $500 million in Virginia Beach alone, what that means in terms of the predicted performance of our sales tax revenues for the balance of this fiscal year?
So to answer your question, Councilmember Moss, we have not tried to or been able to put necessarily together economic analysis to try to see what the direct impact is to the city of Virginia Beach. We have reached out to Hampton Roads Economic and spoken with them of what metrics that they're looking at, and they're relying on us to be able to provide them, what is it that we're seeing in our monthly collections as well, because there's one thing that, speaking with Greg Rutendorf, he's having to kind of revamp the previous metrics that they used to use to try to get a sense of how the local and regional economy is doing. We have not been able to get anything specific to the city of Virginia Beach yet that might be able to give us a quantifiable number that we could then put and say as to what the direct impact was to Virginia Beach.
If I could follow up, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
I would think that, I know we have a lagging data situation, but I would think by July, we would have some ability, because certainly, as I've chatted with you earlier, you only have to look at the consumer-driven spending stocks to know that the marketplace has already put a judgment on what's taking place. And I shared with you, if you went back to March of 17 of 2020, Home Depot was 161. Today it's 322, and that's not based upon big, it's the whole stimulus spending and also natural disasters. And you can look at other stocks likewise. So I think there's some proxies out there. So I think, Mr. Mayor and colleagues, come July, we should really be looking to update our revenue forecast for next budget year and then decide how we want to put that flow of money into a reserve account for council initiatives, because I firmly believe, and so do all the economists for the most part, that with GDP predicted at 6 to 7%, that we are going to outperform the revenue baseline on which our budget is being proposed, and we need to capture that money in a reserve account for the council either can give back or we can put it towards much needed flooding projects. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. Most appreciated.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, our partners at the Virginia Beach City Public Schools will come and present on their budget for the next fiscal year.
Good afternoon, Mayor Dyer, Vice Mayor Wood.
Welcome.
And members of the City Council. On behalf of the School Board of the City of Virginia Beach, including Vice Chair Mrs. Melnick present today, I'm pleased to present to you the Virginia Beach City Public Schools Fiscal Year 2021-22 budget document. This is a representation of what we prioritize as a school board and as a school division. We believe the initiatives outlined in this plan are essential to providing our students and staff with the supports they need to succeed during the ongoing health pandemic and beyond. Our proposed spending plan includes a well-earned compensation boost for our employees, funding for more school counselors, a continued focus on special education needs, and additional supports for English language population, Spanish immersion program, and the environmental studies program at the Brock Center. Funds will be used to support an exemplary diversified workforce, goal 4 of our strategic framework, by increasing allowances for employees with advanced degrees, additional duty supplements, and implementing needed market adjustments for custodians, bus drivers, and identified clerical positions. This budget also provides additional teachers for the AVID program and an Achievable Dream Academy. Also important to note is that in order to minimize our reliance on one-time funding, the School Reserve Special Revenue Fund is being reduced from $5,300,000 to $1,334,364, representing a reduction of $3,965,636. Switching gears for a moment, the proposed capital improvement program includes funding to complete 3 projects currently underway: the Princess Anne Middle School replacement, the Plaza Annex addition, and an Achievable Dream Academy at Lynn Middle School. We also plan to begin the replacement of Princess Anne High School, which is now fully funded in the 6-year CIP, as is the Betty F. Williams Elementary School / Bayside 6th grade campus project. This CIP also includes initial funding to plan for the Bayside High School replacement project in years 5 and 6 of the program. It is important to note that the school board heard and incorporated feedback from City Council during budget deliberations last year. Specifically, we have added new PAYGO funding and the use of significantly more reversion funds to the CIP funding plan. Despite the COVID-19 obstacles we have faced, Virginia Beach City Public Schools has continued to thrive in key areas. I'm proud to share that for the 12th consecutive year, we have reached a record on-time graduation rate while continuing to lower the dropout rate. The division was a first-place winner of the National School Board Association's 2020 Magna Award for removing barriers for students through Jumpstart, a partnership between local nonprofit Aid Now and the division's School Social Work Services. The State Board of Education awarded us with 9 2020 Highest Achievement Exemplary Awards, more than any other school division in the state. And ours was the only school division in the Commonwealth to be designated a Virginia Environmental Excellence Program Sustainability Partner by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. These accomplishments and so many others are a testament to the great work that goes on in our schools each and every day. I want to personally thank you, Mr. Mayor, and City Council for your ongoing steadfast support of our schools. The board looks forward to continuing our collaboration as we navigate a post-pandemic world and maintain Virginia Beach's renown as a world-class destination for families. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the Superintendent of Virginia Beach City Public Schools, Dr. Aaron Spence.
Welcome, Dr. Spence.
Thank you and good afternoon. Pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon and to talk a little bit more about our budget in detail. Since March of 2020, as you know, we have been navigating these uncharted territories of managing an education system while in the throes of a worldwide health pandemic. From the moment the governor shut down schools last spring, the need to build essentially 2 school divisions, one all virtual and one face-to-face with pandemic restrictions, emerged, and I'm proud to tell you that we hardly missed a beat. We were able to keep our staff employed and paid throughout, taking care of our workforce and bolstering the local and state economy in a time of economic crisis. We created our continuity of learning plan and then shifted to our emergency learning plan, providing some synchronous learning and a more robust asynchronous experience in the late spring. We tackled the challenges of ending our last school year with a fully virtual environment and providing our staff, students, and families with the supports they needed to finish that year. Then we developed and implemented our fall 2020 plan, a difficult, community-engaged process that ultimately gave families a choice of virtual or in-person learning and provided a blueprint for a successful first half of our school year. And I'm even more pleased to note that all students and families who have chosen to have their students back in a face-to-face environment will have them back in our schools 4 days a week, beginning next week, well ahead of any legislation or other order that might require it. I want City Council to know that it has been and it continues to be our priority, our intention, and our privilege to educate our students safely in the middle of a crisis none of us has ever experienced before. That's why we've built the most robust summer program in the history of this city. And that's why at our most recent board meeting, I announced our intention to have all of our students back 5 days a week in the 2021-2022 school year. And this budget that we're discussing today will support this effort. While our $833.5 million operating budget encompasses the wide range of requirements that it takes to run our school system every day, we've always made sure to provide not just the essentials to our students and staff, but also the resources and compensation that they and that, quite frankly, our community expect. For the school board and for this administration, teacher and staff compensation has been and remains a top priority, and certainly that's the case in fiscal year 2021-22. We have heard and we understand how imperative it is for our school staff to be paid well, to be competitive, and we want to continue to make a significant impact in that regard. Given what our teachers, our leaders, custodians, our counselors, our food services team, our bus drivers, our nurses, our operations, and our central support staff, what the entire Virginia Beach City Public Schools team that makes this city so proud has done this last year, it seems more important than ever that we make good on this priority, which is why our school board has adopted a 4.5% increase in the cost of living adjustment and a 0.5% step increase for those reaching or below the top of the experience scale. But rest assured, this isn't just about addressing their amazing work during the pandemic. As we've talked about and discussed for some time now, Virginia does continue to lag when we talk about pay for instructional staff. These next few slides may look familiar, but I think it's important we continue to highlight the information here. If I can go to the next slide. There we go. As you can see here, instructional pay increases have slowed considerably in Virginia since the recession. If you look at that another way, you can see that very starkly here when you compare the amount of money that's allocated by the state for instructional salary increases versus inflation. And as we've talked a little bit about before, this leaves us ranked 32nd in the nation for teacher pay. And as a reminder, if you take out the Northern Virginia salaries, which pay considerably more than the rest of the state, including Virginia Beach, Virginia drops into the bottom 5 states for teacher pay. Of further concern, data compiled by the National Center for Education Statistics points to a significant national pay gap between teachers and other college graduates, with Virginia having the largest pay gap of any state at nearly 40%. What that means is that on average, other college graduates in our state earn nearly 40% more than our teachers with a bachelor's degree. When you juxtapose teacher compensation in Virginia to the average income in the state, Virginia is quite literally ranked the worst state in the country to be a teacher. That's why it's so critical that we continue to attend to instructional pay and to increase instructional pay when we have the resources to do so, and that we make sure we're doing everything in our power to remain competitive when we are trying to recruit and retain teaching staff. And I'll mention again, Virginia Beach City Public Schools hires approximately 600 teachers a year. We're pleased that the General Assembly and Governor have approved a 5% pay increase for SOQ-funded instructional positions in Virginia Beach City Public Schools and across the Commonwealth, and we're pleased that our adopted budget includes a compensation plan that will allow us to access those funds. As a reminder, we are funded by the state and the locality and the federal government, with the locality being the majority of our funding, state funding coming in at roughly 47%, and then the federal government filling in the remainder. It's also important to note that we aren't just talking about teachers. Our board commitment to compensation for all staff is a long-standing budgeting principle in Virginia Beach. To make further headway in this regard, for the first time in more than 20 years, as you heard, we've also budgeted for an increased allowance for employees with advanced degrees. And again, for the first time in 20 years, we've actually taken a look at our additional duty supplements, things like coaching supplements, for example, which make us competitive in that market. In addition, we've been able to address 2 other compensation issues that the school board's discussed for some time. As you heard Mrs. Rye talk about, we're moving all custodians up a pay grade and upgrading our bus drivers. That makes us more competitive in those markets, and that also helps us think about compensation as the state reevaluates the minimum wage. Puts us in a better position to address that. We're also addressing compensation for guidance department chairs as recommended by our HR team. And it's also important to note, we're not recommending employee premium increases to health insurance based on the work of our Benefits Executive Committee that works with the city. Well, compensation increases are... Oh, sorry. Let me catch up. Woo. While compensation increases are our top priority, we've also addressed other division needs in this budget. We've continued to put an emphasis on the mental health of our students, for example, by increasing the number of guidance counselors for elementary and middle schools by 16. That's to meet new standards of quality requirements from the state. In addition, we're providing additional specialized support positions, behavior intervention teachers and specialists, for example, to meet new SOQ requirements. Both of these will allow us to continue to build on the remarkable progress that we're making relative to social and emotional learning competencies in our schools. We also need to continue to provide the necessary supports for a growing English as a second language population and growing special education population. And finally, we're excited to provide funding to expand the Spanish immersion program and further support the environmental studies program at the Brock Center, and as you heard earlier, the AVID program in our schools. So the reason we're on such firm financial ground today and why we're able to provide our students and staff with this remarkable amount of support that we did during this extraordinary time is thanks to our Chief Financial Officer and to our award-winning budget and finance staff, and I'm really grateful to work for a school division where we put students and staff first no matter what the situation is. And of course, I want to reiterate that we're also very, very grateful to work in a community that values public education and is so proud of its schools, and that understands the economic importance of having a top-tier system of public schools. So how do we make sure that's the case? We remain competitive by attracting and retaining the best and most qualified staff. We remain committed to exceptionally built environments for learning, and we remain committed to academic excellence and innovative programming that set us apart from our peers regionally and nationally. We are really proud of the work we do. As you just heard, despite the pandemic-related obstacles that we continue to face, we are thriving. We had, as was noted, the highest on-time graduation rate on record for Virginia Beach City Public Schools, corresponding to the lowest dropout rate on record for Virginia Beach City Public Schools. I mean, if you can imagine accomplishing that in the midst of a global pandemic, but that's what our teachers and our staff did. What a testament to our work. And not only did we graduate our seniors during the health crisis, but we've also been keeping our future graduates on track, connected to the learning and cared for. While we've been one-to-one for some time as a school division, as you all know, we've also, during this pandemic, had to take a deep look at access to the internet in our community. In Virginia Beach City Public Schools, we've made our parking lots and our playgrounds Wi-Fi accessible, and we've offered extended hours for technology exchange and replacement. 1,000 hotspots were purchased by the school division and delivered to families, and 5,000 wireless headphones given to our teachers with faster and more powerful laptops to allow them to teach students both face-to-face and virtually at the same time. We've kept students fed by making meals available, even when our schools were closed, via a pickup model at all schools, and by delivering food with our buses in some of our more vulnerable neighborhoods. Since the pandemic started between March of 2020 and March of 2021, we served or delivered more than 5.9 million meals, and we're currently averaging 190,000 meals a week, even in this hybrid environment. When our school buildings were closed for in-person learning, we partnered with the city to open safe learning centers where children of working parents, and especially city employees and teachers, could learn safely during the school day. You heard Mrs. Rye talk about a recognition by the National School Boards Association for a program that is dedicated to supporting homeless children in this city, the more than 500 homeless students that we serve in the city of Virginia Beach. You heard Mrs. Rye talk about the exceptional recognition from the State Board of Education for exceeding state accreditation standards, narrowing achievement gaps, and improving outcomes for students. We received 9 of the 2020 Highest Achievement Exemplar Awards. Let me repeat, because this is worth repeating. That is more than any other school division in the state of Virginia. 12 of our schools earned the 2020 Continuous Improvement Award, which highlights schools that are continuing to improve consistently. No other schools in its divisions in Hampton Roads earned as many Continuous Improvement Awards. And I want to highlight and point out that Parkway Elementary School was named a 2020-2021 National ESEA Distinguished School. That's a Title I recognition for schools that teach students living in poverty. That is the second school in as many years that has been recognized at the national level for our work to reach those children. For the second year in a row, we have been, as you heard, designated a Virginia Environmental Excellence Program Sustainability Partner. That's part of our ongoing commitment to sustainable practices, not only in our construction and facilities programs, but also in our curriculum and instructional programs, and in the innovative programs like those you see at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's Brock Center, where we've added a new classroom where I might add students are now learning. VBCPS was recognized by the VDOE as one of only 15 school divisions of innovation across the state for designing and implementing alternatives to traditional instructional practices to improve student learning. And for the third consecutive year, every single one of our comprehensive high schools earned the National Gold Council of Excellence Award from the National Association of Student Councils. This is an award that recognizes student councils for their exemplary records of leadership and community service. Every single one of our high schools earned this award. VBCPS represents more than 50% of the high schools in Virginia to have earned that award. And for 11 consecutive years, we've been named one of the best communities for music education in the country for our outstanding commitment to the arts. And it's important to know that less than 5% of all school districts across the nation earn this prestigious award. Because of all this work and so much more, and the challenges of the pandemic notwithstanding, our students do continue to thrive academically, and every single day, every single one of our 86 schools, because of that, remain fully accredited by the state. Every single one of our schools. We're also excited about our recently adopted equity policy that provides a framework to advance educational equity in alignment with the division's visions, values, and priorities. This calls on us to create an environment where every single child we serve has the opportunity to benefit from high standards, and where every single child we serve has access to effective and inclusive learning environments and the resources needed for a high-quality education. Because of that, an equity assessment is ongoing and will ultimately help lead to the development of a plan that will guide our work as we seek to bring to life the goals and emphases outlined in that policy and in our strategic plan. And we can say with confidence that this budget underscores and will support that work and distinguishes equity as something that needs to undergird what we do. Now, I'm aware that during our last budget discussion together, there were some questions about how we assess our performance. What does it mean to say all of our schools are fully accredited? What does it mean to know that we're a high-performing school division? And I understand those questions. I do think accreditation is incredibly important. After all, just a reminder to City Council, when I arrived here, 16 of our schools were not fully accredited. But I also know that people's experiences inform their opinions, so if they see a test score or a graduation rate, they might not know how to put that in context, and we all know that context matters, so I just want to provide just a little bit of that context today. And one of the best ways to do that is just to look at how we compare to comparable peers nationally. So Virginia Beach is part of something called the Large County and Suburban District Consortium. It's an invitational network of large and diverse and leading suburban and county-wide school divisions across the country, including 19 districts spanning 11 states, includes 8 of the largest 25 school divisions in the nation. These divisions enroll an average of 95,000 students and educate over 1.8 million students. So it's a comparable group for us. One of the benefits of that participation is the ability to benchmark ourselves against these school divisions, and I should note that when we do this, we use an alphabetical listing based on a data sharing agreement. And I'll point out here that for this particular chart, VBCPS is the letter E. So if you look at the state assessments results and the overall percentage of proficient and advanced students, VBCPS outperforms all other of these school divisions on the most recent data set available, which is not the past school year. We did not have data for the past school year, Because we didn't collect that data, nobody took standardized tests across the country. That was waived by the federal government. But ultimately, I think that's something we should all be proud of. You've got a school division that performs well, comparable to its peers, and performs well in this city, and you know how proud our parents are of it. And this budget has and will support the good work that we're doing and the continual growth and improvement that we're seeking. So what I'd like to do is switch gears for a minute. I want to say that no matter what data I show you, it isn't to suggest there aren't opportunities to continue to improve. There certainly are, and just as I mentioned earlier around our equity work, where we remain committed to ensuring that every child has the very best learning experience possible, we know that part of that is the experience in the built learning environment. And as always, we recognize the need for ongoing capital improvements across our school division, another part of our commitment to ensure that every student and every staff member works and learns in an environment designed for excellence. To that end, the proposed capital improvement plan that you have includes funding, as you heard, to complete 3 projects already underway, but it also includes funding, and this is really exciting, to get Princess Anne High School built. That has been beyond the horizon of the capital improvement plan since I arrived. It's something that I know our community is ready for, and it's now in the CIP. As is the Betty F. Williams School and Bayside 6th grade campus replacement project. Both of those inside of the CIP. And the CIP continues to budget for infrastructure projects such as roof and HVAC improvements, replacing playground equipment, and so much more. But of course, even with all this, we all know, as I just heard comments about stormwater, that continual discussion about capital improvements with our city leaders, legislators, and community have to be ongoing in order to make substantive future progress. But this CIP is a much-needed step in the right direction, an opportunity to address real and pressing needs now, and in my estimation, the best 6-year plan that my administration has been able to put before the school board and this council. With that noted, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Farrell Honsiker, to talk more about the specifics of the budget and the funding mechanisms within the CIP. Mr. Honsiker.
Welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this afternoon. I've included this chart in our presentation to emphasize that local funding for K through 12 in Virginia has grown much faster than state funding has during this 10-year period. This chart shows the total amount for all funds. That totals a little over $1 billion, with the operating funds being the largest piece of the budget pie at 76.3%. We are one of the largest businesses in Hampton Roads, with the level of total funding and approximately 9,400 full-time equivalent positions. I would point out that the categorical grants is a much higher percentage in the proposed budget, and that's simply because of the additional CARES funding and American Recovery funding that we will get. That's a little over $130 million. This short chart shows the breakdown of the school operating fund, which totals $833.5 million. As you can see here, the local funding at 49.8% is the largest funding source, with state basic aid and state sales tax being the second largest funding source at 47.9%. Another way to break down the budget pie is by major category. As you would expect, the instructional slice is the largest at 73.6%, operations and maintenance at 11.7%, pupil transportation 5.1%, technology 4.5%, and lastly, administration, attendance, and health at 5.1%. It is important to note here that these specific categories are dictated by the Virginia Department of Education, and our accounting chart of accounts is built around those categories for reporting purposes. Here's the last chart, and this chart shows the expenditure by type. We're a labor-intensive business, as you can see, combining our personnel services or salaries and fringe benefits totals just over 84%. The rest of the other pieces equal to the other 16%, and most of that 16% is discretionary, only leaving a small portion of that for any discretionary spending. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Tony Arnold, our Executive Director of Facilities and Services, to go over the CIP with you.
Welcome, Tony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Great to be with you guys. I've got a handful of slides about the capital improvement program. First, projects, and you've heard these earlier, that are currently under design or construction. The Princeton Middle School replacement project on Seaboard Road, a $77.2 million project that is finishing up this summer. The school will be ready for students in September. That's our 34th school modernization replacement project in the better part of the past 2 decades, approaching $800 million of public investment. The Plaza Annex, 50,000 square foot 2-story office addition, $13.8 million project that is attached to the back of the old Plaza Elementary School, a school that we closed about a decade ago. We're in the process of moving staff in from the Laskin Road Annex into that building this month, and they should be up and running by the middle of May. And as mentioned, the Achievable Dream Addition at Lynn Haven Middle School, about a 30,000 square foot classroom addition to support the high school students that are coming from the Achievable Dream program. That project will start construction later this fall, finish up in late 2022, and be ready for the second semester of 2023. Total about $104 million for these projects, all funded through appropriations to date. I do think it's worth mentioning that the new Thorogood Elementary School quietly opened in the middle of a pandemic this past September on time successfully. That's kind of gotten lost in the past 12 or 13 months. And you've also heard the Environmental Studies Program, the Brock Center project. Although not one of the projects in the capital program, it's a project that we administered jointly with the folks at CBF, and we can't thank Joan Brock and the Brock family enough for that wonderful project. First day in classes today for high school students, so that's a really exciting project. So what else is in this capital program? You heard Dr. Spence talk about infrastructure, what we call our renovations and replacements projects, HVAC projects, re-roofing projects, grounds projects, window replacements, things like that, represent about $18.5 million in fiscal year 21-22, about $130 million over the 6-year window of the capital improvement program. You've obviously got to maintain your infrastructure and your existing assets. We have nearly 11 million square feet of space in this school division. We like to think we do a good job of it, but you cannot do that without support on the capital side of the program. Second year of the renovations and replacements safe school improvements project. Although only $200,000 a year, it's in keeping with the recommendation from the Blue Ribbon Panel. So that's been a successful project that's administered by our Office of Safe Schools. This program continues our successful energy performance contracts project. we have experienced, since our benchmark year of 2006, cost avoidance on the order of $70 million in utility bills. The energy performance contracts projects plays a huge role in that. The cost avoidance in this past fiscal year alone was approaching $10 million. And it also does more than just save energy and save money on the operating budget. It improves the learning environment. If you've been in a building where you've got original fixtures that are 30 years old and you equip that with LED lighting, the impact on the learning environment is really significant. Elementary school playground equipment, about $250,000 a year. We certainly hope that our Parks and Recreation partners are able to continue to match that in the 6-year program of this capital program. We're not getting to these playground equipment projects fast enough at $250,000 a year. And these are not only assets that are used obviously by elementary age kids, but they're used on evenings and weekends by the entire community. The Plaza Annex Office Addition, Achievable Dream Lynn Haven Middle School. You heard Dr. Spence talk about the Princeton High School replacement project being fully funded, tentatively scheduled to open in 2027. We should start educational programming and design charrettes later this fall for that very exciting project. That building is presently 67 years old and will be about 73 years old by the time we finish, so obviously long overdue. And we're excited about the opportunity to create a great high school program and project right next to Town Center. The Betty F. Williams Bayside 6th grade campus project, those buildings are 60 and 64 years old respectively. We'll average about 70 years old by the time we're done. That is also fully funded for the first time. That will complete the work on what we call the Williams Farm campus. You may recall that we were the master planner together with your Parks and Recreation team and built the first 2 schools in there, the Diamond Springs K-1 building, the replacement of Newtown 2-3, so getting to Betty F. Williams and completing the work on that campus is obviously long overdue. And also seed money in years 5 and 6 for the replacement of Bayside High School, which is presently a 57-year-old building. The 4 buildings that I just mentioned, Princess Anne, Betty F. Williams, Bayside 6, or some might refer to as the old Aragona, and Bayside High School, the average age of those buildings by the time we get to them will be about 70 years old. Big picture, the total cost of the capital program over 6 years, including appropriations to date, about $620 million. Year 1, the most important year, approaching $70 million. As Dr. Spence mentioned, a really good, solid capital improvement program this year, something we're all proud of. On the funding side of the equation, this represents the funding sources. The 3 most significant changes in this program compared to last, increased use of public facility revenue bonds, $15 to $12 million annually. Again, continued the energy performance contracts. They were actually scheduled to stop this coming fiscal year. They're very, very good projects where we get a lot in terms of return on investment. And I know council members will be excited to see this, a move back to a dedication to reversion funds and fund balance being a good portion of that being committed to the capital improvement program. This program, across 6 years, the average funding per year is about $63.5 million. Standing in front of you last year, it was $43.2 million. So a tremendous increase in terms of the funding side. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this. This represents all the projects in the capital program. It's in your printed document. Again, just tremendous improvement. It's a great capital program, long overdue. We're excited about it. We're going to start to get to some older high schools here in the next 6 or 7 years. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Spence and Farrell. I appreciate y'all's time.
Okay, any questions? Ms. Wilson, Ms. Wooten, Ms. Henley, and Mr. Moss.
Thanks to everyone for your presentation, and being a former teacher and kids that graduated from our schools and former member of your board. I'm always so proud of our schools and all the staff and everything that you and the board, that y'all do. And it looks like a really great budget that you've put together, and I'm happy to see there's going to be a good compensation package for people that work so hard. I've actually got a couple of questions that really don't have as much to do with the budget. Just since you're here, I thought I would ask you. As you know, we've been very concerned about the violence that's been happening in our city, and been really concerned about the young people. And I think that a lot of these folks that have been getting into trouble have probably been our high school dropouts. And I was just wondering, are we doing, and I think it's, let me back up a little bit. I think we're going to have to come together as a community to work on the violence, and it's going to include the schools and the faith-based and the whole village to come together to work on these probably, and it starts at a young age, but also the high school dropouts. Do we do anything to follow up with the young people that drop out of school? And I know we have a really low dropout rate, but we do have dropouts.
The short answer is yes. I mean, we do try to track our dropouts. You're aware we have the Adult Learning Center.
Right.
We do try to get our students who we can recapture back into the Adult Learning Center, where we offer a GED program and we offer additional training for adults. One of the problems with dropouts is that they tend to be aged out for the most part. And because they've aged out, they're not eligible to come back for our services, but they are eligible for the Adult Learning Center services. I think it's a much broader problem than a dropout problem, right? I think we've got, we have to make sure that students know there's a career path for them. We have to make sure they're well prepared so that they can earn income when they leave us, that they have several ways to accomplish that through career certifications and employment in the local workforce, which is working with us. As a part of our workforce development efforts, we are working very closely with the local business community and hospitality community and others to make sure that we understand what those needs are so that the certifications that we offer can help students be employable. I think there's work we have to do with the police department and with mental health services and with the legal system. I think all of us have to come together with the faith-based community, as you mentioned, to really lift up and support the young people in our community and make sure that they have options when they are with us and options when they leave us. Because I think very often where you find challenges is when people feel hopeless and feel like they don't have options, and or when they're dealing with other issues in their lives that we as a school system can't necessarily address all of, but are certainly an engaged partner.
Right. And I think you're just one slice of that, and I think there's going to be it takes a village, and we're going to all have to come together to and come together to try to reach out and help these folks and realize that there is a much better life for them than to engage in these activities. But I was just kind of curious what we were doing. The other question that I have is I read that the Rescue Act, that there's $82 million coming to the schools, and I was kind of wondering what you're able to use that money for and what your plans are with that money.
Yeah. So the restrictions on those funds are very similar to what the first two ESSER grants restrictions were, which is that they've got to be related to education and pandemic issues. We're able to use that funding, for example, accelerated learning. So I talked about a more robust summer program this year. We've tripled our summer school budget this year in order to provide a vast array of opportunities for young people who may need additional support as they head into the next school year. I'll give you a quick example. We've got something called the Summer Boost Program. The Summer Boost Program might be for a student who was in algebra this year and is going into geometry next year, but really because of the pandemic may have not learned everything they needed to learn. We call it unfinished learning, right? Everything they needed to learn. They can go into the Summer Boost Program and refresh on the algebra concepts they'll need in order to be successful in geometry. That's just an example, but we're doing that across the spectrum, and we're doing that K through 12. So a much more robust summer program. That's an example. Another example, I mentioned a minute ago that we have every intention of bringing back any student who wants to be back 5 days a week next year, and we're working on that now. That's also in legislation, and so we know that that has to happen, but we had every intention of doing that before the legislation was put through. One of the things that we're going to have to do is plan for this kind of what I would call worst-case scenario, which is that we stay where we are today with 3 foot of distancing required between our students based on the CDC and Virginia Department of Health guidance. Well, if right now we're at 60% and we're able to accommodate that, but if we're at 90 or 95% of our students back, we won't be able to accommodate that inside the space we have. What we are allowed to do with those dollars is to renovate existing spaces. So if we had a tech ed lab that's no longer in use, we can turn that back into a classroom and use that money for that. We're able to acquire additional classroom space. We've been, as City Council might remember, in a process of reducing the number of portable classrooms that we've had. Really, essentially, a school's worth of portable classrooms have been reduced over the last 5 years in Virginia Beach because of declining enrollment. We are now looking at needing to lease new portable classroom space so that we can serve students in a more spaced out environment. We can use, in that scenario, the funding for additional staffing because if you build more classroom space, you've got to put more teachers in that classroom space. And of course, our hope is that we'll be able to find that additional staffing if we do that, right? We can use it to improve air quality. So some of our HVAC projects can, if they're COVID related, can be, we can use those funds for that. We can use those funds for any instructional and learning supports that may be needed. So one of the things that we just did, so we have a tutoring program, terrific tutoring program through our Math Science Center, those high school students who tutor students all across the district on math and science. They tutor their middle school counterparts. Unfortunately, they're getting ready for all of their AP exams, so they're no longer available to tutor students. So we picked up a new tutoring program. It's an outsourced tutoring program online that we're making available, and we're able to use these funds for that purpose. So there is a wide degree of latitude. I think the important thing council needs to remember is these are not ongoing dollars. There is a deadline for use, 2 to 3 years, depending on the grant. And at the end of those 2 to 3 years, we will have used those funds for their best and highest use, and after that, they no longer exist. So I know, there were discussions initially at the state level, should we supplant local funding or state funding to the localities with some of these new, recognizing there's this federal infusion of dollars, and we were able to successfully have a conversation at the General Assembly that that's not a good idea, because if we lose those monies now, it'll be very difficult to get them back later. And we can't use them for things like salaries because they're not COVID related. Correct.
Well, I remember when Princeton High School burned, we rented a shopping center for high school.
Yes, ma'am.
Classroom
And believe me
space.
when I tell you, I got Mr. Freeman, our Chief Operations Officer, in the back of the room, Mr. Arnold. Both of them have been engaged a great deal in thinking about ways we can find new classroom space if we need to expand where we teach students.
Right. So thank you, and I just admire our teachers for what they've done and the creativity of having to do this. It's really a dual learning of in-person and with the online learning. I don't think I could have done it, and I really admire them for what they've done, and all of the staff and all of you for pulling this together and keeping everything on track. You've done an outstanding, incredible job. Thank you so much for keeping the schools, and look at the awards that you've done and been able to do all of this. So we're very grateful to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Spence, and good afternoon to everyone who's here from the school division, to the chair and co-chair. And, I listen intently to all of the successes that the school has had during the pandemic. Particularly outstanding is the fact that you've graduated the highest number of graduates during that time. It's interesting that during one of our most challenging times, some of the most wonderful accomplishments are made. And certainly I'm very proud of what the school, the teachers, the staff, everyone is doing in the community during the pandemic. But I'm particularly concerned, though, when I hear statistics like we're the bottom 5 of states for teacher pay. That concerns me, and as a council member, I'm concerned. when I hear that Virginia has the largest pay gap of about 40%. When I hear that Virginia is ranked worst as a state for teachers to teach in, those are very disturbing percentages. We have one of the best school systems, I believe, in our region. Oftentimes, we give many accolades when we're talking about our city, and I just want to make sure, because I know that this is an effort for state, federal, and the city government, but I want to make sure that we're doing our part as a city to ensure that we're supporting you where we need to support you. One of the areas that's also concerning to me is the fact that I read that there's 170 vacancies within the school division, and half of those vacancies are teaching positions. And that's going to, I would say, significantly impact what you're trying to do as the students come back. The very robust program that you have planned in the summer, that's going to significantly impact what you're trying to do, I would probably say. So I don't really have a question here, but I just want to make sure that, you know, I'm understanding and my colleagues are understanding those statistics that are out there that are kind of difficult for our teachers and what they're doing, though they're doing an excellent job. They need support, they need our help. And in the correspondence that I placed at your desk today, I have included them for budget reconciliation, saying that they are considered and have been on the front lines since the pandemic has started, doing everything they can, serving the students, making sure they have meals, making sure they're safe. They've truly been troopers through this whole pandemic, and we need to make sure we include them when we're looking at how we can increase their salaries and looking at their the pay scales, looking at ways to compensate them for the higher education incentives. All of those things we need to make sure we're taking a look at, because they have given their best and continue to give their best even during the pandemic, and they're requiring us to give our best when we're looking at this budget. So thank you.
Ms. Henley?
Yes, I just have some questions that are kind of CIP related. When Tony was talking about the schools and so forth, it's sort of a whole history kind of went through my mind. Of course, my dad was chairman of the school board when Princess Anne High School was built. That was the consolidated high school that was going to serve the whole county for a long time. And then here came all the growth. And so then for the next 50 years, we were building schools faster than anything because we had so many kids coming, and we had all of these portable classrooms. And then we finally got to the point where we got into the modernization at the slowdown. And that's been, as you said, hard to believe. It's 2 decades now that we've started, I guess, with Cook and Creeds, and golly, 20 years have passed pretty quickly. But I know when we started that modernization program, we were relying on, or we thought we were going to rely on, the lottery money from the state. Well, that didn't last very long. But it seemed like we would have a certain pot of state money for school capital projects along the way, but I don't hear about that anymore. So I'm just kind of wondering, how are we paying for these CIP projects now? I mean, this Princess Anne High School, what was it, $3.5 million when it was built, and that was an enormous amount of money, and now, golly, that's not even outfitting the chairs. Where's the CIP money coming from, and do we have any regular amount of money from the state?
The short version on do we have any regular amount of money from the state is no.
No, I
We
thought
do
so.
not. That was eliminated. You see in the funding summary in the capital improvement plan where it says lottery funds is 0 all the way across the board. And that's what those were originally for. The state has since returned some lottery funds, but in general, what happened during the recession and moving forward was that they were playing a little bit of a shell game. Those lottery funds were being put into line items that had originally been in the operating budget that had been cut during the recession and have not been subsequently renewed. And so those lottery funds aren't available. We use them inside the operating budget now. They're no longer available for school construction purposes. If you look at that funding summary, and I can pull it back up, I think. Can we get the slides back up? So there's your funding summary. And if you look at that, you could see the largest percentage of the funding for these capital improvement projects comes from the charter bonds. And we have been putting back into this CIP some additional PAYGO dollars. You heard Mr. Arnold talk quite a bit about energy performance contract funding that allows us to recapture some energy costs. And, you all remember, and you heard Mrs. Rye note this when we were in budget conversations last year, in particular when we were talking about reversion funds. You were very clear, Ms. Henley, you in particular, were very clear, I remember, and Mr. Jones, you as well, that we needed to pay attention to the reversion funds and make sure that we were addressing CIP issues with those reversion funds. I think the school board heard that loud and clear. That is a substantial, all of those are new amounts, and that's a substantial increase in reversion funds to that. The additional money that's in there are the public facility revenue bonds. And so those are really now the primary sources for paying for school construction.
Times change, don't they?
Yes, ma'am. I will say there's a commission now, or a committee anyway, working at the state level on capital instruction and school modernization. And, I think it'd be certainly beneficial for the city and the schools to jointly work together as we speak to our delegation to get their support behind additional state revenues for school modernization. I think everybody sees the need. There's a strong sense that in urban and rural communities, there's a great need because they've got a lot of older buildings, but sometimes in that conversation, more suburban communities like Virginia Beach tend to be left out of that conversation because they think we have a great CIP and we're building new buildings, but they forget we've got buildings that are 75 years old that need to be replaced, so.
Well, I think it's great that we've got such a robust modernization program, and we have to keep going on it. But it's when I look at some of the older schools in other cities around the country, some of them are certainly. I think you all are doing a great job to make sure we're trying to keep up with all of the kids having a good place to live and work. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Mr. Moss.
I have a couple of questions. First, I would just like to state for the record, so the public knows, that we didn't get the courtesy of getting this till today, and our customary policies that we weren't have the opportunity to read this over the weekend. So in the future, I hope that we can get these well in advance of the meeting. I think that's a courtesy this body has deserved. But that aside, I don't want to focus much on the operating budget since we have a school funding formula. The school board's responsible for the choices they make, not us. But I do want to I don't want to talk about the CIP specifically because that is not covered by the funding formula. But I do want to cover a couple things up front just so that we can get an understanding that there are a lot of people in the private sector who work hard. There's a lot of people in the private sector who didn't get paid every day. There's a lot of people in the private sector who lost their jobs, and they work just as hard as the people in the public sector, and we shouldn't forget that. And to put that in perspective, there's about 125,000 people that work in the private sector in Virginia Beach. Doesn't mean they live here, but they work here. Their average weekly wage is $903 a week, which if they worked every week of the year, that's $46,956,000. The average salary you say on your sheet is $61,611 for instructional personnel, which is a small minority of our total workforce, which is 100-something% of about 131% of the average weekly wage of the people who have to earn the taxes to pay the bill. So I think when we look at what our community does to compensate people relative to what they earn, I think we aren't giving our workers in the private sector enough credit for the sacrifice they make for benefits they don't even receive, but yet they provide those for those who serve their children. So not that school teachers aren't doing a great job, because they are, but we often forget to recognize the deck plate people and the things that they don't have and the sacrifices they do make to make sure that their kids have first-class schools, and that should never go unmentioned. But turning to page 3, which would be your slide 5, I hope in the future you could provide me the data source, because when you go to the CPI, the official source, these numbers, you can't get to these numbers on the compound CPI, so I would like to know what source you have. For example, the CPI, I'm looking at it right now on my screen, the internet's great. It's 1.9% for 21, and it's only projected to be 2% in 22. But if you look here, you're almost going up 3% from 21 to 22, and even compounded, you can't really get there. So I would like to know that data set. When you look at slide 6, I think often when people look at averages and sometimes median, they don't do anything by itself. It's a data point, but it's not information. You can't compare it to average price of a home, you can't compare it to the cost of living index, but just to share with you a little bit about why I question what it really tells you. If you look at number 30, which is Montana, the average family, if you divide the rate of the average pay there, $54,385, by the average family income in that state, that teacher's salary is like 98% of the average median income in the state of Montana. But if you come down and look at Virginia, it's 1.49% higher, because you've got rural Virginia and a lot of places that have an impact on average teacher pay, Accomack, you know the places I talk about. And the reason why I mention that is because if you're going to make a note, as you do here, about Northern Virginia skews the numbers, you also have to compensate that the rural areas of Virginia also cause that number to be lower. And what we really need to be comparing is urbanized Virginia less Northern Virginia, because if you look at those prices, I just think that maybe relatively it's right, but I think, a lot of times you can make numbers say anything. So I just think that's it. So the public there's more to that than just an index to really know about how competitive. What's more important, and I am very interested in and providing for, is for the vacancies that we have, what is our recruiting issues, just like with police and fire or whatever it might be? I'd be very interested in learning that, because the marketplace should tell us more about what we want to buy, because you have a quality you want to buy as well, not just a quantity. So I think it's for our marketplace. I'd like to understand the analytics that go behind that. But one thing that wasn't in the brief this year, which has been in the past, is enrollment trends. And I know I've sent some questions, ahead of time, probably don't have the answers here today, but what I'm looking for is, are we gaining, stabilizing, or losing market share of the total universe of students? I mean, I run into, and I'm sure it's anecdotal, how many people today are homeschooling their children? Mm-hmm. And I know there was a spike because of COVID, but how many people have gone to private schooling? Part of it COVID, but some of it's for other reasons, and for probably as many as there are parents. But it would be interesting to know what share of the total universe of students who should be in school are in schooling other than our public schools, and is that number growing or shrinking? And as our physical plant is the same, are we adjusting to what the forecast? So I would like to see some enrollment numbers, because that gets back to the CIP, which I really want to focus on. Now, you've had a lot of not just you, but the school system had a lot of ending fund balances over the years. They vary from 12 to 39 million to 20 million, and about half of that has always been under executed payroll. But we've never seen 50% or more of that reversion money every year put into CIP. And if you look on that slide where you had it, it still was a very small amount relative to the total reversion funds, which I think are estimated to be $21 million this year. Is that correct?
19 to 21 million.
So 19. So if I look at that slide for PAYGO in next year's budget, 21, 22, and I see PAYGO is zero, does that? And then you go to 22, 23, it's 500,000. So that means of the 19 million, only 500,000 is going into the CIP, or
No,
am I
sir.
misreading that chart?
No, sir, you're misreading the chart. If you
Okay.
look down to the bottom where it says 10 million, that's the reversion amount that would go into the CIP.
But
The the PAYGO that's money we pull off the top of the operating budget before we balance the revenues.
So I would suggest on that's not clear, because I see fund balance reversion school special reserve in my mind, but thank you for clarifying that, Dr. Spence. It didn't come across, though. I know you said CIP. It didn't come across that that's what that's for, because I do believe we can probably do more than that in light of the additional funding that's coming your way. And I suspect if you look, well, school board, not you personally, the school board, I think we can do better than that within your school system, and I would challenge you to do that. The reason being, as you know, our credit limit is severely constrained. You know, I didn't make those decisions to do the dome site. I didn't make those decisions to do the sportsplex, and I didn't make those decisions to do a music hall. But all those things consume debt that we couldn't put towards flooding. And I've often said, going home to a dry home is more important than going to a renovated school, because they're wet at home, and then they're displaced, and then you're driving them around. But that's $69 million we can't put into flood mitigation, and those are homes at risk if we do this. So this is a big challenge for us. And so I encourage you to look harder at coming up with more of those dollars from within, because I don't know that in the priority of things that, you know, we can make that happen and not put people at risk for flooding that we shouldn't do it. And that's a public safety, and I think that's our first responsibility. Now, we are looking, or potentially we might reduce the real estate tax below what the city manager has recommended. And I think that share, and you correct me, but if you get about 46% of that reduction comes to the schools, you know, looking to go to the revenue neutral rate. So I would ask you, the board, to consider, you know, how that, and I'd like to, before we get to reconciliation, I'd like to know how that would be absorbed, how you would deal with that reduction in real estate revenue.
I guess we'd have to know what that is.
Well, it's the difference
We
between.
were already, we already in the budget amendment that was sent over to council dealt with the first cut. So when we knew what the next cut would be, we would have to go back and talk with the school board.
I understand. I'm just saying, you know, City Manager can certainly provide you what those options are being looked at, and he can, I'm just asking that before reconciliation, which is May 4th, I believe it is, that you could provide us that, the school board, that is. It's a reduction from 1.007 to 0.9887, which is the revenue neutral rate under state law. So I think we owe you to give us, the school board, to give us what that impact would be. But in your assessment, where is our current enrollment? I know it's down 3,000 if I read in the paper, is that correct?
Yeah, I think it would be not comparable to talk about this year. So I have, and we can get you the demographic projections. That number has been going down steadily since mid-90s.
Right.
That number has slowed relatively. 2 years ago, that number actually went up a little bit. And then it's projected to go down roughly, Tony, do you remember? I think it's roughly 100 students a year for a few more years, and then begin to really level out.
Because I would be interested, and I'm sure your board would be as well, and I'm sure you're doing some internal forecasting, how many of the students that left, because you do know how many students, and whether they're in private schools or homeschooled or religious exemption, that is data that you have at the school system?
We don't have the private school data. We have homeschool data. They're required to report that to us by the state, and religious exemptions we get, and the school board approves.
But you don't have the private school piece?
We're not privy to private school enrollment data.
But Mr. City Manager, do we have the demographics or relative reliability of the kids who are school-aged so that we could do the rough math? I'm just trying to get an idea which is growing faster, the non-public school enrollment, private school, homeschool, or is the public school system losing market share of the universe? I'm just trying to get a feel for what that is.
Sure.
And I'm sure you do surveys of why people leave and don't come back.
Again, in this moment where we have seen a significant number of students and families choose to leave the public schools, not just in Virginia, but across the state and across the nation, not just at Virginia Beach, I don't think it's really reasonable or thoughtful to compare that number. I think it would be better for us to look prior to COVID and post-COVID, what's happening. Are we going to see, we expect and anticipate to see a substantial increase in enrollment from this year to next year, for example, because we're going back 5 days a week. So, I could tell you that's our projection. We project to see a substantial increase in enrollment next year relative to this year, but we saw a substantial decrease prior to that because we weren't back in school full time and some folks wanted their children to be in those environments. So I'm not sure how we can compare that data. I think we can give you a long-term picture based on our demographers' projections, and I think we can tell you what we've been dealing with prior to COVID, and we can have that conversation.
The reason why I'm asking, because if you look at the projection and you look at that school base, it gets back to saying, in longer term and just where the millennials are and when they get out of that childbearing age, you start working those numbers, then you can start seeing, what are you doing with all the physical plant that we have, and all of it probably isn't targeted for modernization. I'm sure you're doing that smart work and that smart look, and that's what I'm really after. And lastly, if I could, Mr. Mayor, the question I have is, when we had our CARE Act money, we used it in ways we could get reimbursed and increase the fungibility of that money later. Did you have that opportunity in this year's budget to actually get reimbursed for things that were otherwise appropriated but were eligible for reimbursement and created internal cash flow that gave you fungibility? And do you have that opportunity of the $82 million? I realize you haven't got that officially, but do you have like opportunities going forward?
So I think it's more likely that we had that opportunity with the first round of CARES funding because the school division was already engaged in pandemic expenses, and those could then be reimbursed. I think as we move forward, because of the restrictions and because of the way we'll spend it on needs that we have relative to the pandemic.
Well, if I could follow up on that, then for this block, just like we did, got reimbursed, is that in that $19 million, your ending fund balance, is that factored into that? No, it's not. So that money was later reapplied to other expenses?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I just thought you might have another source of capital improvement money. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, let me thank you for listening to us last year when we talked to you about the reversion funds and the need for addressing some of the CIP issues with the reversion funds. Second, I want to congratulate you and all of your people for the success that you actually have in the system as being one of the best school systems in the state, and the graduation rate that you have and so forth. That's an testament to the fact that you are doing an outstanding job running the school system in Virginia Beach, and I just personally want to thank you for that, and I'm sure the council does too. But you hit a sensitive note in the beginning for me, and maybe it's not a big thing, but it's important to me, and that is, you mentioned that we have 500 homeless children. How do you identify them?
So that's a self-identification process, sir. It comes as a part of the McKinney-Vento Act. It's a federal act that school divisions have to collect information on homeless children, but it's self-identification. But I will say that comes because of the relationships that our schools and our school social workers have with families. So when schools notice that there's something going on, they get word that a student may not be living in a home that they were originally enrolled in, and then we'll contact the social worker, they'll reach out to the family, and we'll try to find out what's going on. So it's a little bit of reliance on the families telling us about their situation, but also the awareness that we have about our children's situation, because our schools, our teachers, our counselors, and our social workers in particular are really attuned to what's going on with our families.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you again for the job that you're doing. It's great to have people like you and all of the people that work in the system who do such an outstanding job for us here in Virginia Beach.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Spence and your wonderful team, thank you so much for everything you do. Together we as a city have come through COVID a lot better than a lot of other places because of the hard work and tenacity of everybody concerned. And one thing we got to mention about schools, how important they are to a community. Not only in terms of economic development, people want to come here and bring their families, and a large reason because of the schools, but also the quality of life that you give to people. And, just having them, observing and being part of it. I'll tell you what, you folks are phenomenal. Thank you. God bless you and keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Dehaney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, Director Spanulis from the Virginia Aquariums will come and present on the proposed budget for the next fiscal year.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Mr. Duhaney, I'm Cynthia Spanolis, and I'm happy to share the Virginia Aquarium's operating budget with you today. As you know, the Virginia Aquarium is your Virginia Aquarium. It's a city agency, but we're also robustly supported by our nonprofit partner, the Virginia Aquarium Foundation. And I'll share briefly with you as I go through my slides their support to the city of Virginia Beach. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Donna Ellis and Carol Thompson from my team. To put it simply, today I am merely asking you to fund about $1.8 million. The rest is earned through revenues and support from your nonprofit partner. So I'm going to pause for just a moment, and again, that's less than $2 million from the general fund that we're requesting today. Now, consider what we bring to the table. $260 million yearly in economic impact, an educational and cultural institution for our community, not to mention our research and conservation initiatives that are recognized across the world. Recently, if you were following the news, you noted that there was a massive sea turtle stranding in Texas due to the severe cold weather. The Virginia Aquarium was the lead agency heading up the recovery efforts through the Safe Sea Turtle Program, which Mark Swingle, our Chief of Research and Conservation, heads up. So let me briefly share our budget with you. We have 127 FTEs, and you'll note, if you've been following over the last few years, this has decreased from a high of 154 in 2018. We've been transitioning to temporary employees to be more flexible during our busy times, and this allows us to either ramp up or ramp down during those times. In addition, we lost a number of FTEs last year due to budget cuts. We have 11 divisions, which I will address in the next few slides, and a total budget of $12.7 million. This graph shows you the breakdown of our 11 divisions. And of course, you will note at the Virginia Aquarium, as you would probably guess, our biggest expenses are our exhibits, facilities, and animal husbandry. But let me go to the next slide and show you the exact dollars. Our budget increased by 9% total this year, but we are increasing in size by over 75% with our new Darden Marine Animal Conservation Center and our South Building expansion. Both buildings should open this summer. So I'll pause and say, imagine adding almost 100,000 square feet to your footprint, yet you're only increasing your expenses by 9%. So let me go through a few of the highlights for you. Marketing. We're increasing our marketing due to the opening of the South Building. Gallery education. Thanks to you in January, we added 2 new gallery educators for the South Building's opening, and we plan to have increased programming. Of course, our gift shop will have additional items, and it's a new gift shop to the South Building, and you can imagine the cost of goods and staffing are increased slightly. The Veterinarian Services, this was a new budget unit that we merged from live exhibits and animal husbandry, and this budget unit includes 2 staff veterinarians, 2 veterinarian technicians. And you'll note the corresponding decrease in the live exhibits and animal husbandry line item. The Aquarium Foundation decreased in funding due to COVID. Remember, our nonprofit partner funds the employees that do all of our special programming, such as school outreach, birthday parties, on-site and off-site school programs. And due to COVID, we anticipate that these smaller group activities will not occur as much during the next year. And additionally, our boat capacity is currently capped at 50% due to COVID. Our live exhibits, again, I mentioned that this is decreased due to the Veterinarian Services. And finally, our general operating expenses. This includes a new data analyst and a reinstatement of supplies that were cut during the pandemic, such as new uniforms and other operating supplies. So let's talk about the revenues. This slide shows you our revenues. We are projecting a very conservative projection for our attendance next year at about 515,000. And of course, this is well below our normal attendance at the high of 700,000. This chart does not show you direct revenues such as admissions tax, which contributes about $700,000 each year. And of course, our economic impact of $260 million to the community. So again, in my opening, I mentioned the $1.8 million general fund support. Everything else is through earned revenues. So let's talk about some of our major changes. Last year, due to budget cuts, our giant screen theater was permanently closed. In this budget cycle, we're adding 2 new FTEs, that's an associate veterinarian and a data analyst, but I'll remind you that these are fully funded by our revenues. We're using contracted manpower more than we are city part-time employees. And this year, we're going to purchase a forklift and a pickup truck for our new Darden Marine Animal Conservation Center, and some of those funds are provided by our nonprofit foundation. So our initiatives that are underway, some of our initiatives that were not funded is our security features for additional cameras. As everyone today is looking at additional cameras for their facilities, so are we. We do have a few cameras, but we would like to add more. Aging facility. Our main building is approaching 30 years old, and salt, seawater, concrete, all don't get along. And so we've master planned our main building, and we are looking to the future for that. Of course, as I mentioned, due to COVID, we are currently operating under a time ticket with capped attendance. We are allowing 55 people in every 15 minutes. And to just give you an idea, that's about 400 people less a day than normally during 2019. And finally, we're really excited because we are opening the Darden Marine Animal Conservation Center and the South Building this summer. So I'd like to thank you for your continued support, and I'd like to invite each of you for a tour of the Darden Marine Animal Conservation Center and the South Building. And certainly, I hope to see you all there for the ribbon cutting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, Mr. Bellucci.
Thank you. I just want to once again thank you and your colleagues, your entire team for everything that you do for our community and for our ecosystem and wildlife. I think the Virginia Aquarium is an incredible asset for our community and for our Commonwealth, and that's been widely recognized and discussed at your various presentations. And I also want to thank you for keeping me and members of council in the loop so often. I've had a chance since joining council to visit, 3 or 4 times, and I'm always amazed at the work that you do and really admire the educational and cultural and scientific contributions that your institution makes for our city. I do have a question, 2 questions really. One is on slide 5, and that is related to the rental income of $15,000. Was that was that the rental income from last year, or is that what you're projecting for next year?
That's our projection, and I'm glad you asked that question because I asked Donna Ellis before we got here, and that's a change in what it's called. It was called facility rental income, so if you've ever had a wedding or a special event at the aquarium, that's the income, the earned revenue that we receive through that. It's projected quite low for next year because of COVID.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I think it's incredibly low. And I guess how many private rentals does the aquarium usually have throughout the year?
So it
For
is
weddings,
quite low.
corporate events? Yeah.
And I'm glad that you honed in on it. It is quite low because you have to remember that the city gets 25% of that revenue and the foundation gets 75% of that revenue. So you have to picture that 15,000 is the 25% share for the city of Virginia Beach.
Okay.
So great question.
That and if or maybe we could talk separately, but I'd be interested in why that sharing formula was created and what the impact of it would be, because when we talk about, and I'm not questioning in any way the many financial contributions the foundation makes toward the aquarium, but it's sort of hard to say when 75% of the rental revenue from a city facility goes into the foundation, that then the foundation is contributing to the aquarium, that the foundation is contributing those funds, because in fact it's a city-owned and operated building. But anyway, that's a separate discussion, and I'm sure there's a backstory there that I'm not aware of, but I'd be interested in it. And I'm not questioning it, but I'd like to know more. I certainly would like to know more about that. And private rental agreements, and that is something that I happen to know about, so that's something that I was interested in. And I know we have a full agenda today, but I think I've had the chance to work with you and collaborate. I should say work with you. That I've had the chance to help to refer some organizations to the aquarium and to the adventure park, I think is called, as well as to the whale watching tours. And there's something that I think a lot of people in our community may not be aware of, that I think is really important service that you provide, and that's part of this whole portfolio, and that's accessibility for underserved constituencies, for young people in particular, but anyone really from who may not be able to afford to visit the aquarium. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about some of your programs in that area, and how the aquarium is creating accessibility and opportunities for more people in Virginia Beach.
Sure, happy to. So, of course, our mission is to inspire people to conserve the marine environment, and we want all people to love the marine environment. And so our foundation is very passionate about education, and also very passionate about people being able to visit the aquarium. And so the foundation established what they call Access Aquarium, and that's a special fund that donors give to for underserved youth groups, such as Teens with a Purpose, which I'm thankful that you shared with me, and we're able to have them come join us at the aquarium, as well as do some dolphin watching tours as well. But our nonprofit partner, again, funds that fully, so that's a reimbursement to the city of Virginia Beach for those admissions funds. But our donors feel very passionate, as we do, about inspiring all age groups and all income levels.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Moss.
Just quick, I want to apologize that I've never been able to take advantage of your invitations, but between this job and my elderly mother, there's not a lot of free time.
Well, the invitation always stands. I hope that you'll come. I'm happy to do it weekends or nights as well. So invitation is always there, Mr. Moss.
But I do want to applaud the leadership and fresh look you have brought to the facility and the team. I mean, it really has shown. I've got these briefs over the years, but clearly you have brought a new level of fresh perspective, and also extend our thanks, I'm sure I speak for the council as a whole, to the board itself of the foundation. That is what a fabulous job they do, and thank you so much.
Thank you, and I hope you'll come for a tour.
I'm going to work on it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, and once again, I think the council is very grateful, and the people are very grateful. You're truly a jewel, and Mr. Moss, it would be really worth it to get a tour, because you'll see how much detail goes into taking care of all those animals, and it's quite a complex operation, but it's such a friendly environment. Thanks a lot, and continued success.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Dehaney, could we do one more, and then we'll take a short break?
Okay. Mr. Mayor, at this time, Director Smith from Human Services will give you an expedited presentation on the Human Services Department so she doesn't stand in the way of your break.
Welcome, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, and I certainly will give an expedited version of this so that I don't stand in your break, but I would like to, before I even get started, just recognize Maria, who is here, Maria Kurtz, who has helped with this budget this year. We have not had a business manager since last year, so she has stepped up as an analyst and done a remarkable job on a very complex budget. So I wanted to recognize that. Okay, so first slide. The organization is about 1,166 city FTEs, and then you add another 287 contract staff on top of that. Our general fund is about 124 million. Then we have some grant funds, which would be the sheriff's jail program, that's about 916, as well as 916,000. The CCP, which is the community corrections, that's our program that is now under BHDS. That's about 1.8 million. And then we have some CIT security that we actually pay the police for. That's about 197,000. And then we have a very small social services gift fund that is donations, and that's about 46K. So our total budget is 127 million. This next slide is going to give you a little bit more about what makes up the Behavioral Health Developmental Services program budget, as well as my administration is in there as well. The developmental service is about 40% of the budget. Substance use and behavioral health is about another 40% of the budget, so 80% there. This budget is 60 million of the 127 million. And the other pieces you can see here all add up to about the 60 million. Community corrections was moved over to behavioral health and developmental services to get some synergy between our jail programs, and it's doing a very good job with behavioral health and developmental services. Next slide is social services. So social services budget is about 55 million of the 127 million. There, again, you can see employment services is where we have our Housing Resource Center. CSA, the Children's Services Act, that's about 13 million. Children's Services is where our child welfare programs are, and the benefits eligibility program, that's about 19%. Okay, so this slide shows you where we went down just a little bit in the gift fund. That's because we spent some of those donations for the foster care kids. We also show an amended in the FY 2022 budget of about 256,000 up, although we did have a reduction. The $256,000 up is going to come from the family services specialist positions that we are getting this year from the state, fully funded by the states. That's about 187,000 of, or 182,000 of that, and the rest of it comes from a little bit of the jail billing. Next slide, please. Okay, so let me give you a few highlights about what happened in the Human Services Department this year. First and foremost, we were able to move to a telehealth, teleworking environment very fast. We cannot miss a beat. We have to serve citizens 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So with that, we took whatever laptops we had on the desk and moved right on out into the homes to be able to process the benefits, meet with clients virtually, and managed to do all that very, very fast. The 24/7 programs kept going. The main thing with the 24/7 programs was to get them that PPE, which you know there was a nationwide shortage, so we kept working with the pod and emergency services to get them what they needed so they could serve the citizens. We also this year, in the midst of a pandemic, the staff came forward and said, there's a lot going on that is not just a pandemic. There's a lot of social unrest. We need to pay attention to this, and that's what Human Services does. So about 14 of them got together, starting on the BHDS side and then folding in the social services side, to create a committee that would provide training, resources, a way to talk to each other and communicate with each other across different areas of the agency, but also with our clients who were asking questions, felt uncomfortable. And so I just really want to say what a remarkable job that was in the middle of a pandemic. So we launched it in September. In October, it really went live. We do something every month to recognize the month. So in January, it was Martin Luther King Day. In February, it was Black History Month. In March, it was Women's History Month. So we recognize those individuals locally, then in the state, as well as nationally, and what they've done. It's a really wonderful group of staff that took that on. The next initiative I'd like to highlight for you is the mobile food pantries. You know, back in October, you were providing some resources through the CARES funding to the food bank. Well, we partnered with them. Our first mobile food pantry event was at our building. Traffic was not good on Virginia Beach Boulevard because we overloaded the building and the parking lot. So at that time, we decided to move it out to the amphitheater. So the first one at the amphitheater was in February. We have one next week, April 27th, at the amphitheater. We expect to serve more people next week than we even did in February, and we served about 1,500 families in February. So those are great events. We're all out there. It's, 8 hours of running around and making sure that everybody gets the food that they need, and it's real good that we're able to do that. We'll do one more in June, and then we'll do another at the holiday time. So some highlights from Behavioral Health Developmental Services. Same-day access kept rolling through the pandemic. We served about 1,400 people that way this year. Clinical staff, again, telehealth services. We do somewhere in the range of 9,500 telehealth services a month. About 1,000 of those are with the physicians. The residential services, as I said to you, just kept going. I can't tell you how proud I am of them. Really, not missing a beat, helping everyone in those 24/7 programs that we have right through the pandemic. Okay. A little bit more here, little social services highlights. 18,192 new SNAP applications since the start of the pandemic. To give you a comparison, about 14,000 in that same time frame the year before. So about 4,000 more. Mainly those came from March, April, and May, right around when the pandemic started. So that was a really remarkable 100%, 150% increase right then. Now we've kind of evened out, but we're very high in comparison to the last year. Foster care was able to find 37 children their forever home. Adult Protective Services kept going right through the pandemic. They went into nursing homes, they went into group homes, hospitals. Of course, we were finding them the PPE so they could do that job. Personal property and real estate tax relief, that was a new program for us. We were asked to do it by this council in the summer, and we were able to stand that program up in about 6 weeks. And what we did was we pulled some staff from the other side of the agency who had been working in the day programs, but our day programs were closed at the time, trained them up. We're able to process 1,953 applications. We did extend that program about 4 times to try to give everybody the opportunity to put in for it, so 4 extensions on it, and we finally closed it out at the end of January. Okay, so this is where we had a little bit of a reduction in our budget. So what we did is we actually took 2 of the 4 positions in our skilled nursing program and reduced those. The skilled nursing program, or skilled nursing, is a service under the waiver. So these 14 clients can get services from a private provider, but they actually were able to go to their PCPs for what they needed. So our case managers, as well as our residential staff, are working with them very closely to make sure if they have any nursing needs that comes back up, they can get that again through their waiver service. Adult day treatment, we did discontinue this program. There were 4.7 staff in that program. So we took the vacant positions with these 2, so you know that they're just the vacant positions that we reduced. The other 2 staff have moved over to outpatient, and we're looking to start what's called an intensive outpatient program with those staff. The transition and the consolidation of the Cape Henry Group Home and Colby Way Intermediate Care Facility. So Cape Henry, the group home, was actually sold by the owners. So we had until January, the end of January, to move those clients. And we found that out probably maybe the end of October, beginning of November. So in 2 months, we were able to give all 5 of the clients choice. But what ended up happening with this is the Colby Way ICF only had 2 beds filled of the 5. So those clients chose to go to some vacant beds in our Kentucky Avenue site, and we were able to move all 5 clients over to the Colby Way site. So it worked out for everyone to have a new facility that they were going to, but also so that no one was displaced. We did take a reduction of about 19.5 staff here. So I just mentioned the 2 additional family service specialists that are funded by Social Services, Department of Social Services. And then I'm going to talk a little bit, just touch on some more funding that is going to come our way from the state over the STEP funds. But the next slide is about the $182,000 for the family specialists, family service specialists. So they're fully funded in FY22. There'd be a 15.5% match in FY23, which we will work with Budget Management Services on and how we work that out. We always want to maximize the state funds, and so we will work on that with them over the next budget cycle. These 2 positions are going to provide prevention services. They're going to do some case management, help to strengthen families so that children do not go into foster care. That's what this is about. Okay. So the Marcus Alert and Adult Mobile Crisis, we're actually going to come present to you probably the end of May or June on these programs. The Marcus Alert is not an actual alert. It's a set of protocols that we are working on with the police. So our Deputy Director over Behavioral Health Developmental Services is on a state committee as well as organizing our local committee around this. We are the one CSB in this area who is picking up this project. So there were 5 sites in the state of Virginia, and we're one of them. And the reason we're one of them is because we have very robust crisis services already underneath as a foundation, but now we're going to be able to even make those greater and better so that we're able to serve more citizens, keep them out of jail, out of the hospital. Okay, so I won't go into this, but so much, the details there. And a little bit more on STEP. We're going to get some money for Veterans Initiative. 1 FTE will be paid for. Peer Services, again, another FTE. All this money is coming in after we already built this budget, because that's how the state funds usually work for us. Okay, and
Mr. Dehaney, I assume those initiatives you talked about were the items you mentioned in your April 16th letter of things that were the reconciliation thing. You said here were some staff initiatives that were coming up that we're going to add. Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I was just curious, when you say designed to strengthen families, what does that mean?
To strengthen, is that the family services specialist that you're referring to, the 2 positions?
Yes.
Yes. So what they will do, the case managers and the positions that we will get, will be able to use some of the federal funds that come down through the state to do some mental health services, substance use disorder referrals, this type of thing, as well as get into the home and try to work with even kin to help keep that child out of foster care. So it's all about going into the home and helping to strengthen that family so that we do not have a placement in foster care.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Smith, and thank you so much for your presentation. Just want to commend the department because I know that the services you provide are certainly essential to the residents of Virginia Beach, but they are indeed critical during a pandemic. And I'd like to say during the pandemic, it's been highlighted that there are families who struggle and there are food deserts within our city. And your department has really stepped up and been instrumental in providing the food pantry that's needed. And I can't tell you how grateful I am just to see everybody working together to help to serve our residents in a critical time of need. So I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart of all that you and your staff do to really reach out to the residents of Virginia Beach.
Thank you so much, and you're welcome to come out again. You
Yeah.
came out the last time, so thank you very much for that.
Ms. Henley.
Yeah. I think this department probably is the most challenging. I don't know how you manage to get around to everything that you have to keep up with. It's phenomenal when you look at all of the different needs and programs and how you all address them. You've got such a challenge, and I think you all had an awful lot to deal with during the pandemic as far as exposure. I noticed the cases seem to be pretty high in your department, and that's because your folks were out there with these people. And just let your folks know that it didn't go unnoticed and unappreciated, that they were still out there doing their job, even though they were in a very vulnerable position for exposure.
Thank you.
One of the things that I have continued to mention throughout this pandemic and so forth, and with the other kinds of things that we've been faced with the unrest and the violence in our country. I mean, we look at what is the number is just unreal of mass shootings in the last month nationwide, 45 or I don't know, it's unreal. Mm-hmm. And we keep saying, well, there's a mental health issue related here some way. Somehow or other, I think we really need to look to see what the role of mental health is, and maybe it's the Marcus Alert. I know y'all have the jail initiative that you do with the CIT. If there are things that we can do, that we should be doing to help address these problems before they get to be tragedies, what are y'all, I mean, I know these things that I've mentioned are just probably the tip of the iceberg of what you all do, but do you see a need that we need to address, that we could address in a fashion, or something that you've got on the horizon that we might be able to look to some? I mean, I really see this as a place for some of this CARES Act money, because I think we've had a lot of emotional and mental changes as a part of this pandemic. And there's certainly been a lot of changes in our culture in the last year for whatever reason. And you all are at the pivotal point of addressing this. And do you have any ideas off the top of your head, or maybe we could talk later?
Well, just off the top.
I'll start real quick.
Okay.
So, Councilmember Henley, after we get through the budget presentations, as soon as we get through that, one of the presentations that we wanted to bring to council was an update on the Marcus Alert, and also the initiative that Director Smith is working on with Sheriff Stolley for the jail. So we were intending to get to that, to talk specifically about some of those mental health concerns. Director Smith can add more if she wants to.
So yes, that's true, and that will provide some information. And also, we have same-day access. That started just a couple years ago, and it's part of the STEP actual program, which is System Transformation, Excellence, and Performance. It comes from the state. So with same-day access, you can just come to our facility. Now, right now during COVID, we have people calling. We're doing more through Zoom. We've done a lot of virtual appointments, but they still can come in and sit separately from the clinician, so we've tried to distance a little bit. But you can walk in the same day and get mental health treatment. So it really is about encouraging people in the community who may be isolated, who may be showing signs that they have a mental health issue, to come and get services because they're there for you.
Well, there's certainly, I mean, there's this awareness that I think we have got to have. I mean, this recent thing with the FedEx thing, when clearly that was a person who had been identified by the family as having issues, and somehow or other the ball got dropped. We've really got to be aware that there's something going on here, and I think you have got as well as the public safety departments you're working with have really got a challenge, and we all have to be a part of working on this and really trying to see what we can do to turn this around.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. All right, I just want to say thank you, because as your department really helped bring us through the pandemic to date in a very human and empathetic way.
Thank you.
Kudos to you and your magnificent staff.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, at this point, can we take a short break? If we can try to get it expedited. We're running a little bit behind, but we're talking about some very important stuff. Move a little expeditiously if possible. Certainly, all of this is important, but we want to make sure we get the stormwater and some of the other buildings and roads in that we had to defer. So, okay, so if it's okay, Mr. Dehaney, if we can proceed.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, Brian Solis, the acting resort administrator, will provide an update to City Council.
Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Mr. Manager, Mr. Stiles. There we go. Thank you, Chris. I'm here to give you kind of your inaugural briefing on the Resort Management Office. It's really a reestablished standalone office from the 90s. And while I'm talking about, or where I'm showing the mission for the office, small department, I'd like to introduce Jamie Capps, who's with me. She is your special events and resort programs manager. She permits between her and her staff, 7 staff, they permit between 400 and 600 events throughout the year in a normal year. She also manages all the resort franchises, business opportunities that are in the resort area. And also Christy Mosman in the back, my left, we have stole her from the police department. She supervised the team of public safety analysts there, and she'll be, in addition to kind of like an office manager, she'll be our analyst and also developing performance measures to track how we progress the resolution that you put forward back in September. So in terms of what we do, it's not only permitting of events in the oceanfront area, but across the city. So everywhere except for public parks, which Mr. Kirschman does, and he'll sure touch on that during his briefing after mine, including Town Center, for example. Again, all the franchise opportunities and public spaces, everything from the seasonal horseback riding to the beach equipment rental to the boardwalk vendors to the Surrey permits and the like. We just, this year, started a resort ambassador service. Some of you may remember the friendship patrols that were volunteers and faith-based groups, decades ago. And these are paid folks, though, and they show up like it, and they're dependable, and they work in 3 shifts, 5 a.m. to 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, and then Sunday through Thursday, and then 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday. And it's a year-round service as well. So even during the shoulder season, they will have a presence from everything from homeless outreach to supplemental cleaning services. And then, of course, your entertainment services contract that primarily provides nightly entertainment and larger scale events to entertain our residents and our visitors, including, it's now a year-round program, including last night on the town at Town Center, our New Year's Eve program. So we manage that as well. So as you may recall, Council made it a priority as advanced through the Resort Advisory Commission's resolution on September 1 to reestablish this new office. And you did that through a funding appropriation on December 1st. Basically took a core group, Jamie's division of special events, permitting and resort programs from CVB, and that established a core for the department. And we now have 2 locations. So if you want to come for a special event permit, we have offices and conference rooms and other infrastructures to be able to make financial transactions in one office location. And then we really have an on-the-ground field location now established at 401 Virginia Beach Boulevard, essentially the corner of Arctic Avenue and 17th Street. and that's for overall coordination of the Resort Management Office, including roughly 24 to 30 ambassadors that operate out of there, that small space. Organizationally, we're a lean department, but we have a mighty mission, and we're starting to do some really, I think, impactful work. So it's 10 full-time employees funded from the tip, and then we coordinate in a matrix management style type of system across the organization to also include 4 full-time employees, 3 from housing and neighborhood preservation, and 1 from planning. So on your left, special events programming operates out of the Town Bank building, existing 8 FTEs, and that includes the beach events entertainment services contract. Code enforcement is focused in the resort area, and I think if you ask your stakeholders, they are seeing a significant uptick in enforcement there. We had a 3-month campaign of education of folks, reminding them of what the ordinances were in the city that we would be enforcing. And then a new level of coordination of homeless outreach throughout the resort area with 2 outreach specialists working out of that office and liaisoning back to the Housing Resource Center. And then lastly, an ambassador program hosted by Block by Block. In addition to that, we coordinate down the bottom right with 3 significant issues that impact the resort area: maintenance with our friends in Public Works and Parks and Recreation, and parking management that is will be housed out of Economic Development, and then the public safety agencies, not only fire, police, and EMS, but also the Office of Emergency Management. So for this year, you see a 113% increase, and that's primarily because you made it such a priority to establish this office that it was basically funded for half a year. So in effect, you're almost seeing double the budget. Although, the next slide, I'll show you that based on input and enhancing the Resort Management Initiative, we have added funding to both the Resort Ambassador Program and entertainment to increase programming in the resort area. So it went from roughly a $3.1 million program to about a $4.3 million a year program. That also includes entertainment of some of the larger groups that will be coming for indoor meetings, conventions, and sports tourism activities at our convention center and our sports center. So the larger groups that we want them to come back perennially, or at least every other year, and bring their event here and spend their money here and stay for turnications. There's going to be an effort to entertain them while they're here as well at those facilities. The Ambassador Program, we feel like we have a pretty robust program at $1 million a year, but we see some areas that we could even further enhance their impact and are looking to increase that funding amount roughly 25%. In its wisdom, city manager and deputy city managers put together a rapid response team that will be housed in Public Works, also funded from the tip. And what that will do is these resort ambassadors will have smart systems and handheld devices like smartphones, and they enter in work orders. In addition to doing graffiti abatement, cleaning, power washing, they enter in work orders for cracked sidewalks, downed signage, and the like. And the goal would be for Public Works to be able to address those relatively quickly. And again, the majority of the office is funded from the Tourism Investment Program. These clips, you've already had a lot of positive coverage from the investment you have made in the Ambassador Program. And so far, it's going really well. I'd like to really thank Budget Management Services for helping me stand up this office. It's just, we're a small office, so it's been really helpful. And then Public Works in terms of renovating the building that we went in, making it suitable for our field office, fleet management for getting us our vehicles, and building maintenance as well. So with that, I'll stand by for any questions you may have, Mr. Mayor and members of council.
Okay, any questions? Ms. Wilson?
Just a really quick question. So you're in that where the Republican parking was. Is the Republic parking still in that building too, or are they somewhere else?
So we did go into where Republic Parking was renting space on 17th Street, and it's my understanding they consolidated their operations off Alaskan Road. I don't have the address, but we can get that for you.
Yeah.
They're still managed by the city. They're still the city's.
Sometimes people want to know where to get parking permits, like for the Ninth Street garage and stuff, so.
Okay. Yep, it's town center, various garages, and we will get that information out.
Great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Moss?
We've had a number of emails, I'm sure I'm not the only one, talking about litter at the oceanfront. And also talking about, they see the ambassadors and stuff will walk right by obvious trash. And one of the comments was, at Disney World, every employee picks up litter. It's like everybody, management, everybody. So I don't know if that fits into the role of ambassador or not, but if it doesn't, that's fine too, because there's things, they're working with that. But somehow, we just need to either change our mode of operation or better educate the business owners at the oceanfront who have a different perspective of what they think they should be doing. There's just a gap there. That's not a criticism. I'm just pointing out feedback that we've received based on observations. They may be anecdotal and may not be merited, but I'm just sharing those, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Moss, it is certainly within their span of control and their duties to pick up litter in the public space. If it happens to be on a private alleyway or otherwise, we try to seek permission to get on there. But if it's in the public space, they absolutely should, on the sidewalk, for example, or public park, or the boardwalk or connector park, they absolutely should be, and we'll certainly reinforce that.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Brian, small department, extremely important. Thanks for all the good work you have been doing over the years to make that resort area a lot better. Thank you.
Sir, thank you.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, Director Kirschman from Parks and Rec will give an update on the proposed budget for his department.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, Manager Duhaney, Michael Kirschman, Parks and Recreation, and I will quickly go through our fiscal year 22 budget proposal. Before I begin, I do want to recognize Kremina Dimitrova, raise your hand, who works very hard managing all of our finances and budget within the department. Okay, so quickly, I just want to quickly go over that every Park and Recreation department in the country is a little different. And they're never just Parks and Recreation. We're more than just 290 parks and 7,000 acres and all of the assets that are in those parks, all the ball fields, bathrooms, playgrounds, canoe launches, picnic shelters. We're more than that. We also maintain all the city properties everywhere throughout the city. So every pump station, police station, firehouse, the aquarium, municipal center, any city property we also maintain, as well as all 91 public schools, all of their outdoor areas we maintain, all of their athletic fields, and all of the miles of roadways, divided roadways throughout the city. We maintain the oceanfront boardwalk. If it's growing and green, we're maintaining it. We're all the bikeways and trails. We're not just the rec centers, we're also the largest child care provider in the city. In a pre-COVID times, we're serving 3,000 children per day in the before and after school programs or throughout the summer. So it's a very large operation encompassing more than just playgrounds and parks here in Virginia Beach. That's how the department is set up. If you have any questions, let me know. You'll see the bulk of our operations are in the two divisions called Programming and Operations. That's all the recreation centers, park permitting and childcare, and the Parks and Landscape Services, which maintains all the assets I just talked about. As is the case with most park and recreation departments around the country, we depend heavily on part-time employees. It's just our business model, and that's familiar. We have a lot of lifeguards, child care staff that are part-time. And so you'll see that roughly 1/3 of our staffing is full-time, 2/3 are part-time. When you combine them all together, we have roughly 870 FTEs in our park system, and that's been pretty much flat for over 5 years, and actually slightly left. We lost about 18 FTEs in the current fiscal year due to the budget cuts. That's where you can see where all the money goes to, just in a different format. And I will say where our money comes from. We don't have that slide in here, but this is definitely one of the most complex park and recreation budgets for a city I have ever seen. In most cities, it's really just general fund dollars combined with your revenue, and that's your park and recreation budget. But here we get a little, there's a little sliver for town center. It helps us maintain town center. A little sliver for the ocean front from the tip. The schools pay us $5 million to maintain the schools. A little bit from open space. Then we have our special revenue fund. Then we have the general fund. And then we have our revenues. So it's a complex, all those little buckets and big buckets coming together combined to give us roughly a $66.7 million operating budget to provide all the services. There it is in a different format, and I can answer any questions they'd like to see. I'd like to really just dive into some of the highlights changes for our budget this year. This was a tough year for Park and Rec because we are somewhat a revenue-driven department. Roughly 30% of our operating dollars are our own revenues. In the COVID times, that really caused an issue because we faced a revenue drop and had no idea what to project. We also are starting to see some decreases in out-of-school time participation. So on top of everything else, we're budgeting for a 5% decrease in the amount of children coming through that program. As you know, our fund balance has taken some significant hits over the last 18 months. And so we're proposing for next fiscal year not to transfer the typical $1 million to fund balance at the end of the year. So that happens every year. We transfer $1 million at the end of the year, but we're not doing that for next year because of that. I'm sorry, we're not transferring from fund balance to the rec center's CIP because fund balance has taken such a huge hit. We also know coming up for us, it's going to hit this department more so than likely any other department in the city, but we do have minimum wage increases coming, and that will impact. That's the first increase coming in May, and the second one just a little bit in January. Won't hit us too bad, but the following fiscal year, it's going to be a funding challenge and something we're going to be talking more seriously about next year in terms of how that cascades throughout our department and needing to raise salaries for many of our positions and to address the compression that will result from that. So a couple highlights for next year that have been proposed. One is to really restructure our recreation center memberships. This is all based on really two concepts. One is equity and one is simplicity. We are moving towards a system that is akin to the private sector, and really we are saying now, moving forward, we're going to eliminate premier memberships, eliminate senior memberships, and have one adult membership where everything is included. So just as an example, people pay extra right now for a premier membership, and then they get all free classes. Fitness classes are considered an extra type of program. And when you're starting out years ago, that was the case. But we now consider fitness classes a core service, just like going to the pool, working out in the fitness center, playing racquetball, walking the track. And just like in the private sector, you pay one fee, all your classes are included. So by doing this, we will have all adults paying the same fee, getting the same services. No longer can you need to buy a regular membership, but then do a punch card, pay extra to get this punch card so you can pay for each class as you go along. The classes will just be included, and there'll be great efficiencies on the side of staff, as well at the front desk, and as well as with our marketing. When new people walk in, we'll say, here's the fee, everything's included. So that is some of the changes to the recreation center memberships. Additionally, we have quite a few little minor adjustments throughout the park system, athletic field rentals, swim classes increases, very small increases across the board in a number of areas, and all those combined equal $31,000. I do want to make one note about the recreation center memberships restructuring. The entire package together, what we're doing, is pretty much budget neutral. We're not doing this to make money or lose money. Again, we're doing it from an equity lens and a simplicity lens. An adult membership will go from $104 to $110. Everything's included. If I made it $111 a year, we'd be making money off it. If I made it $109, we wouldn't even get that $11,000. It'd be a lot less. So we went to the nearest full dollar to make it pretty much a budget neutral proposal. Again, just to simplify our fee structures and to make everything one fee for everybody. Moving on to the out-of-school time program. So as you all know, we stepped up and provided essential city child care as well as Centera Hospital employees child care when the pandemic first started. and then we continued our childcare throughout the summer, and we've been doing it ever since, under the COVID guidelines and safety protocols. As we come out of COVID, there's one thing we know, and that is we have to learn our lessons that COVID has taught us. And one of the lessons that COVID has quickly taught us is that we have got to get back to a smaller group size per staff person in our child care program. So you may not realize this, but pre-COVID, our staff-to-child ratio in our out-of-school time program was 1:18. One staff member for 18 children. And I see some head shaking, and I think you'll agree that is too many kids for any, as good as our staff are, that is too many kids. It's no different than the school system. When you have a smaller group size, you have better span of control, higher quality program. Moving forward out of COVID, we do not want to go back to 1:18. What we'd like to do is move to a 1:15 ratio. Now what that does though, there's pros and cons, what that does though is the out-of-school time program and child care program has pretty much always covered its costs. The people using that service have covered the costs of that program. And we have a very low-cost child care program, and because we're in the schools and because of the way we operate with our staffing model, it's very affordable, very accessible. But moving from 1:18 to 1:15 means we still need the same number of staff, but there's less kids per group, and so the average cost for a parent who has a child in our program would go from $204 to $248 per month to go to that new staffing model. In addition to that, though, we will be able to, moving forward, this has been a high priority for years, to get back to providing healthy snacks for every child every day. And if you're not aware of this, what happens every day in this program is some of the kids come with snacks and some don't. And when you're sitting in your school's over at 3 o'clock and you're there till 6 p.m. and you ate at 11:30, you need a little energy, right? And what'll happen is these kids go to that side of the room and eat their snacks, and these kids go to that side of the room and watch them eat their snacks. And we don't need that and don't want that anymore. The schools can help us. It's minimal costs. I think it's close to 50 cents per child per day to provide this service and give every child a healthy snack, but that does add up when you're talking thousands of kids every day. But we can do that as part of this as well, combined. So I think we'll have a much stronger and higher quality program moving forward. Some minor other things you'll see in our budget. You'll see marketing, one position being added. You'll see it in the budget as a position being added, but it's not quite. We're taking a contractual employee who's been with us for years and finally bringing them on board. So it's not a new body for me. It's just we're funding it in a different method. And as you know, and thank you to City Council, we're restoring, not just restoring the Summer Youth Employee Program funding that was cut last year, we've added funds to it for the upcoming years through the CARES funding. So there'll be a tremendous impact on our summer youth. And again, one of those things we can do for our youth to make a difference moving forward in terms of all the other social issues we're facing is give them opportunities every summer and a paycheck and job skills moving forward. And a special thanks to Councilman Aaron Rouse for supporting that initiative. Every department had to submit a 95% budget, which was a 5% budget decrease. That really affects us on the general fund side of our budget, and the general fund side of our budget is mainly landscape management. So that's maintaining all the grounds throughout the city. We did submit a 5% reduction, but in our request, we asked for that money back because if that 5% cut stays on landscaping, what that means is we would have to move from an 18 to 21 day mow cycle. So on all the roads around the city, we're mowing them all once every 20 days on average. And you know it starts getting high around 20 days. That's when the calls start coming in. Had we had to stuck with a 5% cut, we would have had to have gone to a 24-day mow cycle. And that makes a difference. And a 24-day cycle means on some weeks it's 25, 26, 27 days if you had a few days of rain and you get behind. That money has been restored in the manager's recommended budget, and we appreciate that tremendously. It'll make a big difference. You'll see that, as usual, when new projects come online, new roads, new bridges, new precinct offices for the police, their grounds need maintained. So you'll see $127,000 That's really for landscape management to maintain all the new city projects that are coming online. And the other one's just moving the position from one fund to another for efficiency's sake. The only thing I'll mention as I close out here, you'll see this in a little bit. I would say that in our operating budget, we have all these little pots, and it's a moving target, and we can provide our services. We can't do everything we want to do or everything the public expects us to do on the operating side, but we're getting things done. Where you're going to see our main issues in this department is on the capital side of things. We do not have the capital assets, the capital dollars to maintain the assets we have throughout the system. And that's between all of our, I'll just give one quick example because it's very easy to illustrate. We are responsible for 189 playgrounds, and you heard the schools talk about their playgrounds as well in their presentation. A typical playground, commercial grade, outdoors in the elements, lasts 15 years. After 15 years, it needs replaced. It's no longer safe. It starts wearing down. We have to abide by national playground safety standards. All of our playgrounds are inspected. You might get 16, 17, 18 years out of it. You will inspect them every year, and if it can last another year, we keep it going. Right now, we have the funding in our CIP to redo 4 or 5 playgrounds a year, and it's more like 3 or 4 because the cost of steel is going up in lumber. We have 26 playgrounds over 15 years old, and a tsunami is about to hit us of playgrounds that were installed in 2007, 2008, 2009 that are all coming due with their lifespan. And so what I'm saying is the last thing I want is the public to, I consider my job as a director, it's unwritten in my job description, but to mitigate and decrease calls to council and to the city manager, right? To deal with the issues on the front end, to be proactive so that we don't have public outcry, don't have issues, don't have complaints. My fear is we are reaching a point to where we will be removing playgrounds in our park system because they are no longer safe, and we will not have the funding to replace them. If you go into a neighborhood and remove someone's neighborhood playground, and but you're removing 10, and you only have money to replace 4, and you're doing that every year, and that's just on playgrounds. We have crumbling parking lots and cinder block old construction bathrooms and dugouts and just a lot of assets, not to mention our recreation centers. You saw the study on that. Not to just modernize them, but just to maintain what we have. We're underfunded for the rec centers in terms of HVACs, roofing systems on the big 3 and CTAC. Not to mention some great things we have out there that we could do like the VB Trail. So you'll hear all that, but I just wanted to mention that as part of my presentation, and you'll hear that in Chad Morris's presentation later today on the capital side of things. With that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Wood and then Mr. Jones.
So when you talk about your deferred maintenance and aging infrastructure, I assume this does not include undeveloped parks.
It does not.
So things that you want to do. So do you have a feel for what that dollar figure is?
Yeah, that's about 47 million, roughly 40. So we have what's called undeveloped. We have about 40 park sites that have been sitting there vacant, some for decades,
Right.
most for around 10 years, where the public is saying, when do I get my park? That would roughly be 47 to 50 million to build those parks out. We have a $30 million deferred maintenance backlog on our existing assets. We would need that money today to repair and replace what's crumbling right now. Now, that does not include the buildings, the rec centers, or things like the sportsplex.
And how much are the rec centers?
Rec centers, is it 37 million? Just to stay where we are. Roughly 37 million to maintain,
So you're talking over $100 million just to maintain what we have.
but that also included the undeveloped sites.
Right.
Yes.
But I mean, just to do what we have without adding anything new.
Without redoing a rec center, without building the VB trail, without building another rec center,
Okay.
but just maintaining what we have, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that you're changing the fee,
Yes.
and then you're eliminating your CIP contribution of $1 million. Is that right?
We're eliminating the contribution that would come from fund balance to the CIP. because the fund balance has been hit. So typically what happens every year is, at the end of the year, and Carmina can come up and talk more about, at the end of every year, we take $1 million from fund balance, and that transfers over to the rec center CIP to give us a $2 million CIP. We have another $1 million. We have $2 million to repair and replace existing assets in the rec centers. So for instance, the slide at Williams Farm is all rusted out. The one that goes outside the building and comes back in needs completely redone. That's $450,000, I believe. That's just an example of one thing that needs done. So in a normal year, we have $2 million to address things like that, plus replace cardio equipment, all that kind of indoor furnishing and fixtures kinds of things. Next year, we won't transfer that million because the fund balance is so low. The fund balance is so low because we've tapped it to balance our budget due to lost revenues, as well as some other things. We use some of the dollars for tax relief for the public. So we went from a $17 million fund balance. At the end of this year, we're going to be at $3 million. We'll be around $3 million at the end of this fiscal year.
But you're reducing the fee.
The fees are, but all of our revenues, the fee structure we did is just it's budget neutral. When we make those fee changes, all those changes still give us the same projected revenue as if we don't make those changes.
So you're not lowering your revenue.
We're not lowering our revenue or increasing our revenue,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Have you had complaints about the fees themselves?
Not many. Now, when we do every 2 years, we do a random household survey. One of the questions we ask is, do you use our rec centers? We have very high utilization here in Virginia Beach. It's off the charts compared to a lot of communities. But if the person says no, why don't you use the rec centers? We ask, why not? The top answer is usually don't have enough time or don't want to. But usually the number 2 answer is fees are too high. So fees are a barrier to the rec center memberships. However, either people don't know about it or don't take advantage of it, but some do. We also have a 50% fee waiver for rec center memberships. So if you are financially challenged, if you can't afford $107 or $110 a year for a membership, we can knock that in half. We get about 1,600 of those a year.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Moss. And then
It's been a while, but I know it was reduced, but when we built the initial rec centers, not counting Kentsville, which was the first one.
Yes.
On the bond referendum, we approved a tax, or the voters endorsed a tax increase, which was then reduced to a smaller amount.
That's correct.
What is that rate that you
Near
are?
3.5 cents, but I'm going to have Kevin, I just saw that just about a week ago, but it's point,
Stuck.
and 3.046 cents.
I would like Budget Office just to go back and tell us what it was when it was adopted and what was the basis for each of its reductions, because the last time I remembered it being talked about, it was something more than the number you just cited. So I'd like to know the last time it was adjusted. And so that means about $18.6 million in this budget. $18.6 million would come out of that 3 cents.
We can get that to you, and in fact, David Bradley gave us to it right before he left. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I do know it was decreased when the growth was so big in the city. So it was almost like a reduction, but a neutral, budget neutral.
Well, what I'm going to try to figure out is, when it was reduced, did the rate at the top charged everyone stay the same and the money went somewhere else? That's what I'm going to be looking at.
So you want to know what the fees were as well at the rec center?
No, not the fees, just if your tax rate came down, but the top rate overall the city stayed the same, then money was siphoned. The taxpayers didn't get anything. So I'm just trying to understand that. But my other question is, getting back to Mr. Jones's question is, when you look at some of the larger things, I won't mention any names, but the $10 a month things, and a lot less services, we need to make sure that, in trying to stay budget neutral, which I applaud you for, that we're not so underpricing our product that we're not either, one, asking the general fund to make a conscious choice to contribute to a capital account, because this bill comes back to haunt you either way. You can't afford to underprice your product. you know, and or you put yourself out of business. And I think that might have been kind of where, maybe it wasn't, where kind of asking is, are we covering our cost? And I would assume when next budget cycle, the next 12 months, when the infrastructure of money comes around from the rescue plan, which is about $450 billion nationwide, that we'll be looking at these kind of things, Mr. Mayor, members of council, to go and fix, because clearly you can tell people have busted driveways, roofs that need repaired at their own house, and when you add up everybody's expenses here over the week, there's way more expense than anyone has money for, so we're gonna have to figure out how to prioritize those efforts. And since Mrs. Abbott's not here, I'll mention it, you know, we have to find something less than $51 million to do on that abandoned rail track to bring some kind of use sooner than later. Thank you.
Right, Ms. Wilson, and then Mr. Tower.
Thank you. What is the average cost for replacing a playground?
80 to 100,000?
How much?
80 to 100,000 for a neighborhood playground.
About 100,000 per playground? Wow. Okay, thank you.
We can't just buy these playgrounds at Home Depot. These aren't built for backyards. A lot of people are shocked when they hear that.
Right.
But these are commercial grade. Of course, we go out to bid, so it's low bid. We get them on contract. We get the best prices we can. But you're looking at $80,000 to $100,000 per playground to replace.
So if you were bidding more of them than 4 or 5 at a time, you might be able to get a better price?
We typically do that as it is. Yeah, we have an annual services contract as it is. So I don't know how much of a difference that would make by adding more. We get the best price there is.
And even at that price, they still only last about
15 years.
15 years?
15 years is the average life cycle, and when we put into our capital asset program, you know, your average tennis court should be resurfaced every 7 years. Your average playground should be replaced every 15 years. It's a very simple calculation.
Does that include the special surfacing on the?
The 5-bar? So
on the ground?
that would not include what's called pour in place, nor does that include a shade structure. We don't have any shade structures. We do have Grommet Island, which is nice, but most of our playgrounds don't. Shade structures can almost double the cost.
No, but a lot of times that's
The 5-bar, the 5-bar, the mulch underneath.
Well, it's not really mulch, it's a cushiony substance that's on the ground.
That's solid? Okay, that's what I mean by pour in place. So it's poured and hardens in place, but it's kind of soft and spongy. It would not include pour in place.
Something like that.
That's very expensive. And we only really have that at a couple sites like Grommet Island at Mount Trashmore.
All right, thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Tower, and if we could please be succinct.
Thank you. I'll try to be, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Kirschman. You run a very complex operation. Every time I go near it, I find out another a bell and whistle. I'll trouble you just a little bit. For one, if you could give us some information, because I know the people in the sports tourism industry are interested in obtaining Wi-Fi for theirs. Could you tell me sort of what you think about that and what the costs involved would be?
So all the budget analysis we looked at is that's roughly to put Wi-Fi. We looked at 3 main places where it should go. That's Princeton Athletic Complex, City View Park, and Mount Trashmore at the stage. And this really enables event organizers, tournament organizers, anybody else to live stream activities, live stream games, sell merchandise easily when you have Wi-Fi there. So that budget request, that's roughly to install it at all 3 places, is an ongoing cost. We can do it pretty cheaply to install it. We don't need money to do that, but it's $188,000 per year to provide Wi-Fi at those locations. So that was submitted, but not included in the manager's recommended budget.
Okay. My understanding is that some of our competitors, in terms of providing fields for play, do provide that service. So we are at we're at a competitive disadvantage, at least with some of the host cities.
I'm aware of 4 or 5 in the state that currently have that, and I'm aware of other ones that are currently working on it.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
Your folks make Virginia Beach great. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Mr. Dehaney.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at this time, we'll move over to the CIP, and we'll start with stormwater.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. My name is Tony Utterback. I'm proud to present to you today the FY22 Stormwater Management CIP. I'm going to begin with an overview of the funding and how it's distributed between the three sections. Then I'm going to present to you the flood control section, followed by Mark Jones, who will present the operations and maintenance section, and then Jim Milliken will present the regulatory section, followed up by our challenges. The stormwater CIP is made up of these three sections. The flood control section is the largest and has a 6-year budget of $255.7 million, which makes up 61% of the total budget. It contains 38 projects and programs, and 13 of those are not fully funded. The second section is the operations and maintenance section that has a 6-year budget of $110 million, which makes up 26% of the total budget. It contains 18 projects and programs, and 5 of those are not fully funded. And the last section is stormwater regulatory with a 6-year budget of $56.2 million, which makes up 13% of the total budget. The total proposed 6-year budget for the stormwater CIP is $421.9 million. Now I'm going to move into the flood control section and start with projects and programs with no substantial changes. We have 26 projects in the CIP with no significant changes. This is the first 19 of those. You can see from the table the different phases that each one of these projects are in. You are familiar with these projects. I have presented on them in the past. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail on all of them. Just one thing I want to point out in this table, the last column, the BTC, that represents the balance to complete for these projects. The one you see in red, the Central Resort Redirect Stormwater to the 16th Street Pump Station project, I will highlight that one and discuss further in just a minute. And these are the remaining 7 projects with the same table. And I will highlight the Windsor Woods Tidegate project coming up. Here are the 8 programs in our CIP that do not have any substantial changes. For the programs, I am showing you the allocations by year so you can see how each of them are funded. And again, the last column is the balance to complete. And you will notice the stormwater projects, the watershed projects, which includes the Atlantic Ocean, the Elizabeth River, the Little Creek, the Lynn Haven, and the Southern Rivers watershed projects, all have balance to completes, and they do not have continuous allocations shown. We are still in the process performing the master plans for each of these, and as those master plans are completed, the projects will be identified. So the first project I wanted to highlight is the Central Resort Redirect Stormwater to the 16th Street Pump Station project. We are fully funding this project in the 6-year program. We received multiple flood complaints at this intersection of 21st and Baltic Avenue last summer. At least 3 times there were moderate rain events that occurred. This project will relieve flooding at that intersection by redirecting the stormwater to the 16th Street Pump Station. This stormwater currently drains to the Lynn Haven River drainage basin, and by redirecting it to the Atlantic Ocean by way of the 16th Street Pump Station, this is helping us meet our Chesapeake Bay TMDL requirements as part of our MS4 permit. The estimated project cost is $15 million. And is shown fully funded with the allocations you see. The next project I wanted to highlight is the Windsor Woods Tidegate project. This is a first in one of the major projects to be constructed in the Windsor Woods neighborhood. This project will create storage in the lakes, the creeks, and the pipes in the Windsor Woods neighborhood by blocking the incoming tide from Thalia Creek. The tide gate is located on city property, which is adjacent to Mount Trashmore Park. You can see the rendering in the photo shows the location of the tide gate in relation to the pump station that is currently under design. The project includes 4 gates for a total width of 60 feet. It also includes interim pumping facilities until we construct the permanent pumping station. Design is approximately 90% complete. We are scheduled to begin construction in September. The total project cost is estimated at $11 million, and we are showing appropriation in FY22 to fully fund this project. Now I'm going to move into programs that have some modifications. There are 2 of them. The first one I want to highlight is the Stormwater Master Planning Analysis and Inventory Program. The costs for this program have increased due to the number of simulated flooding areas that have been identified from the modeling. If you recall, this program contains 2 phases. In the first phase, we completed all of the modeling, and we are now in the second phase by creating the master plans for the 15 drainage basins. The program also receives an annual funding allocation to cover the costs of maintaining the city's tide and rain gauges through a reimbursement contract with USGS. The proposed stormwater CIP fully funds this increase in FY22 and 23. The next program that has been modified is the Stormwater Green Infrastructure Program. In FY21 CIP, we showed a total project cost of $20 million. This is the cost of the construction for the marsh restoration project in Back Bay. We've increased that estimated project cost to $40 million and included yearly allocations to begin looking at green infrastructure in other areas of the city like the Elizabeth River drainage basin. You can see those allocations in the first row in the FY22 proposed. The second row shows the additional funding that the program would need to fully cover the $39.2 million balance to complete, also showing the $20 million to construct the Marsh Terrace project. We continue to look for federal and state funding opportunities to find that construction funding for the Marsh Terrace project. Now I want to go into new projects that are in the CIP. There are 2 of them. The first one is the Holland Road Gate. This is located in the Lakes neighborhood on the west side of Holland Road at the culvert that drains Chimney Hill into the lakes. The gate will create additional storage in the Lakes Canal. The project also includes storm drain improvements on Carew Road and Chimney Hill Boulevard. It is estimated to cost $8.5 million. We are able to partially fund this project in the 6-year CIP, but it has a balance to complete of $4.5 million. The next new project is the Stormwater Project Administration Project. This concept was presented at City Council's workshop back in March. This project provides contract funding for a consultant to administer project controls for the Stormwater CIP. The services that will be included are project and organizational oversight, implementing a project management information system, developing a cash flow forecasting tool, creating a risk management plan, and coordinating status reports, including some type of dashboard. The project is funded in the CIP at $2 million in year 1. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mark Jones, who will present the operations and maintenance section.
Hey, welcome, Mark.
Welcome, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Manager Dehaney. It's good to actually see you in person. It's almost like, are you really there, or is it a WebEx?
It's good to be seen, too.
All right, operations and maintenance. Let me make sure I push the right button here. Which one? There we go. Take my mask down here. So first, to discuss the operations, maintenance projects and programs with no changes. We have three. We talked about last year, 42nd Street Pump Station's outfall project. That is in the middle of construction. We finished the internal modifications to the pump station, and we're in the process of still working on the pumps and the issues with that, and the outfall flap gates pump inspections, which was related to the work inside the station. Arctic Avenue, here just recently, that was designed up to construction, and that is just recently been, that work has been being completed. Pinewood Road is just finishing up design and will be going to construction here this fiscal year. We have 15 programs with no changes, totaling about $26.3 million for FY22. Just to point out, which I'll go over here in a little more detail in a second, originally FY22 through 25 was reduced between the three CIPs. I'll show you $3 million per year between those three CIP, maintenance CIPs. Here recently, next year, FY22, that money was returned to the proposed CIP. You'll also notice the additional funding for FY23 to 25 is a little less. That's because the cave-in dollars adds an additional $4 million for the cave-in repair program, and FY22 proposed funded the additional $1.5 million for the canal program as well. Control programs, no changes. The lake management dredging program, FY22, currently proposed at funding level, normal funding level, $4.9 million. Still the goal on a 50-year, it's currently on a 95-year cycle. Goal is a 50-year cycle. FY23 to 25 with the current funding reductions would put it on approximate 100-year cycle. If that money is not returned, of course, that would be 23 and through 25. We still complete on average 6 to 7 lakes per year on approximate $750K per lake. Couple of points to note: we are on Lake 38 in active construction on the City Council's approved top 50 list, and we are currently under design on Lake 44. So we are pressing along on the current active priorities, City Council's priority. Next is our ditch program. Same thing, FY23 through 25. Same thing, had funding reductions. 22 proposed is back to original funding level. Goals an 8-year cycle. If not returned, 23 through 25 would take the current 12-year cycle and set it back to an approximate 15-year cycle. That's based on a $2.25 million reduction at $100 per linear foot loss at $750 per year. We figure we'd lose about 3 years of that cycle time. And lastly, the neighborhood rehab is currently on approximately a 50-year cycle, losing the FY23 through 25 dollars. We would lose that $2.5 million, would set us back about 15 years on the current cycle. We're trying to get to that 15-year neighborhood cycle on maintenance neighborhood improvements. Currently, FY22 proposed is $5.75 million. And with that, I will turn it over to the regulatory group, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of Council, I'm here to present the Stormwater Regulatory and Water Quality Proposed CIP. Our group oversees the administration of the city's permit for its Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4. This permit regulates our stormwater discharges to creeks and rivers. The city is in its 5th year of a 5-year permit. The program includes inspections and audits by DEQ and EPA every 5 years. If either finds noncompliance, they can issue fines of up to $32,500 per day per occurrence. The proposed CIP provides a balanced stormwater quality improvement program throughout all watersheds in the city. This is a long-term improvement program being implemented over the next 40 to 50 years. This will address local water quality. It also addresses the programmatic compliance requirements of the MS4 permit. Adequate funding is available to support the MS4 program. That's the big takeaway. I'll start with the programs and projects with no changes. While the majority of our water quality CIP is programmatic, standalone projects are proposed when the total project cost is greater than $1 million. Projects of this nature generally are enhancements to existing lakes that add features such as forebays and wetlands to an existing lake for water quality credits. Our Bayville Lake and Lake Edward projects are both fit this mold, and as well as our 2 new standalone projects, which I will present on later. The Lynn Haven River Basin Ecosystem Restoration Project is currently under construction and will be presented at a later slide. Most of our programs are driven by pollutant reduction requirements, or TMDLs, in the MS4 permit. These TMDLs are kind of like a pollution budget for our lakes, streams, and rivers. These TMDLs are applied throughout the city, and we have developed some of our programs to each focus on water quality improvements for different watersheds of the city. Our programmatic CIPs include the stormwater quality enhancements, which funds action plans for achieving the required pollutant reductions, project planning, and stormwater quality monitoring. The Surface Water Regulatory Program funds several programs to ensure our MS4 permit compliance. The Lynn Haven River Basin project is one of our standalone CIP projects. This project supports Chesapeake Bay and Lynn Haven River Basin restoration efforts. This is a great example of a successful partnership between the City of Virginia Beach and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The city participates in a cost-share agreement with the Corps to contribute $14.5 million of the $40 million total cost. Phase 1 of this project is currently under construction, with Phase 2 beginning design and planning efforts. Moving on to our programs with modifications and projects. The Stormwater Quality Enhancement Program supports water quality monitoring requirements and pollutant reduction requirements of the MS4. We are currently identifying locations for future water quality improvements citywide. Using GIS, we've identified over 1,000 potential project sites in the North Landing watershed alone to prioritize for design and construction. We have recently developed a project list identifying future projects for this watershed. Annual funding for this CIP has been reduced to shift or move funding to establish 2 new watershed-based CIPs. This will demonstrate a balanced water quality improvement program citywide. The Atlantic Ocean and Little Creek watershed programs were funded out of this program in past years and are now proposed as individual programs moving forward. Which leads me to our new programs and projects. The Atlantic Ocean program will support water quality projects in the Atlantic Ocean watershed. Projects have already been identified for implementation in this new CIP. The Little Creek program will support water quality projects in the Little Creek watershed. Planning is underway to identify projects for this CIP. Other new projects include the Chatham Hall Lake project, which will enhance the existing lake to improve water quality, supporting the Chesapeake Bay and bacteria pollutant reduction requirements. This project was previously funded by the Elizabeth River Watershed CIP. This project is planned to go to construction next year. The Kemps Lake project was also previously funded by the Elizabeth River program. Similar to the project at Chatham Hall, we are enhancing the existing lake and plan to go to construction next year. Our overall challenges for the stormwater CIP at large, one of the primary challenges of the stormwater CIP over the next few years could be said to be one of managing a balancing act between the need for new infrastructure and maintaining the existing infrastructure. Much of the systems in many neighborhoods are aging and undersized, which creates a significant maintenance need. Infrastructure above ground, like ditches and canals and BMPs, need to be maintained in order to continue to provide capacity. By the same token, aging and undersized systems create a need for new infrastructure in order to prepare for a future with more frequent and intense rainfall events, as well as higher sea levels. I'll turn it over to questions for the group at large.
Okay, any questions? Mrs. Henley?
All those regulatory projects, I didn't hear any from the southern, they were all.
Sorry, North Landing Watershed is in the Southern Rivers Watershed. So that was the one with, we've have 1,000 projects that we've identified on our list for future implementation. We do also have a, we do also have a stormwater program. I mentioned that we've split up the stormwater programs by watershed, and we do have an individual program for the Southern Rivers watershed where we are planning and we will be designing and constructing stormwater management program or projects for Southern Rivers through that. I think let's see. Let me go to back a couple of slides, if it's okay. I believe the CIP number is 100391. This slide, I think this slide could help. Slide number 28, I think.
Okay.
Jim, can you put
I'll find
that?
more specifics later.
Okay, Ms. Henley, then Mr. Moss.
No, I'm sorry. I said we'll talk more specifics later. I just don't understand the specifics to that.
Yes, ma'am, thank you.
One, it would be good, and I've always said this repeatedly, so I'm going to say it one more time. This tells us how much we're spending, but a few of your slides did tell us, but most of them didn't tell us what we're getting. So we really need to see, and I'd like to see the MSP form permit, the standard, what we were supposed to do, what we've done to date, what these contribute to, and are we in the red or in the black when we're done? Because we can't get any sense of compliance from these slides. They're all about investment, but you see incrementally, but no comprehensive look. Likewise, on the other briefings, you don't get a feeling for the flood protection we're gaining, the capacity that we're providing, the capability that we're acquiring. It's just the project, but not the outcome. And my last comment was, you know, flood mitigation, and I know Mr. Palucci gets more credit for this than I do, maintaining what we have. And I realize there's this debate about the fee, but in the interim, while we debate the fee and talk about where we're going, we shouldn't be reducing the maintenance just because we didn't increase the fee. I'm sure there's other things in our budget that don't provide near the mitigation of protecting people's homes from flooding than sustaining our maintenance standards. So hopefully at reconciliation, we can find a way, because I know there has to be things less important than keeping people's houses dry for $3.5 million in just next year's budget. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else at this point? Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Dehaney, we're running a little bit behind. Do you have some suggestions?
Mr. Mayor, if you're comfortable and the body's comfortable, we can move the remaining CIP presentations to next week to get you back on schedule, and then move the smaller departments down to where we just give you a hard briefing of the presentations and just have the bigger departments present to you next week.
Okay, any objections to that? Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, at this point, council comments? No, we're not going to do, wait a minute, what are going to be? Got council comments, and then the
Are you
agenda
removing
review.
the Parks and Rec and Economic and Tourism Development as well?
And
Remove
build-
all of those?
I can
Okay.
remove all of them unless.
Yeah. Okay, yes, Mr. Moss.
Brief council comment. You know, we are relooking at reconstituting the Stormwater Appeals Board. I did meet with Ron Williams and Mr. Tahan and Kay Wilson today on that, and should be bringing something back in June for council's review and approval.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Anybody else? Mr. Bellucci?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to share that I received this postcard in the mail, that probably many of you did as well, related to the VB Pandemic Relief Partnership. And I was really happy to see this. This is the second one that I've received in the mail. And I want to just say first and foremost that how much I think the nonprofit partnership that was adopted by this council and by the city staff has been successful. And as well that just to remind residents of the resources that are available within this partnership. I think there are a lot of really, really useful items, including access to food, utility payments, rent or mortgage assistance, childcare, healthcare costs, and job training that are available to Virginia Beach residents through this program. And many of these programs are not being utilized to their fullest extent. And so I just want to encourage anyone who's listening or watching to consider visiting vbrelief.org. And as well, I just want to thank those nonprofit partners and those in the city who are responsible for sharing this postcard and for sharing this program more widely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, how about agenda review?
All right, under ordinances and resolutions, we have speakers on items J2, J7, J8, and J9. So that's 2, 7, 8, and 9. Does anybody wish to hear any of the other items or vote no on any of the items? This is only under ordinances, resolutions. Okay?
Okay, planning?
Under planning, item K1 has a speaker, so we'll pull that. Item 2, Dam Neck Storage LLC, modification of proffers, expand the office warehouse and conditional use permit, bulk storage at 1441 London Bridge Road in the Rose Hall District. Mr. Berlucci.
I've heard no objection, and I'm happy to have that on consent.
Okay. Presmont Construction Services LLC, KS Shore LLC, for conditional use permit, automobile service station at 4769 Shore Drive, Bayside District. Okay, that's it, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Moss. Can you turn on your mic?
That, Mr. Wood. I'm voting no on item 6, and I do want to make a comment after the vote, but I'm not pulling the item.
Anybody else wish to vote no on any item that's not being pulled? Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to recess into closed session pursuant to the exemptions from the open meetings allowed by Section 2.2, 3711A Code of Virginia as amended for the following purposes. Publicly held property, discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or the disposition of publicly held property where discussion in an open meeting would be adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711A3, Beach District, Beach District. Legal matters, consultant with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provisions of legal advice by the such counsel pursuant to Section 2.2, 37A 11A8, and that would be regard to the Citizens Review Panel. Next, cybersecurity matters, discussion of plans to protect public safety as it relates to specific cybersecurity threats or vulnerabilities and briefings by staff members, legal counsel, or law enforcement or emergency services officials concerning actions taken to respond to such matters or a related threat to public safety, or discussion of reports or plans related to the security of any governmental facility, building, or structure, or the safety of persons using such facilities, building, or structures pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711A19, cybersecurity update. And then personnel matters, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711A2. And then also council appointments for boards, commissions, committees, authorities, agencies, and appointees. Do I have a motion? Motion and a second. Could I have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Berlucci.
Aye.
Councilmember Henley.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones. Councilmember Moss.
Aye.
Councilmember Rouse. Councilmember Tower.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson.
Aye.
Councilmember Wooten.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood.
Aye.
Mayor Dyer.
Aye.
10-0, noting Ms. Abbott's absence.
Okay, at this point, we will recess into executive, but we'll take a short break first. Thank you.